Hi, hello. It is time at last to talk about the latest season of anime, Spring 2024. This was a fantastic anime season. I think just one of the best we've ever had. I have 8 shows I want to talk about, some of them at considerable length, so I think we'll just skip any further preamble and dive right in with the didn't quite make it, the stuff that I did not watch. Kaiju number 8, we watched I think 2 episodes of this in Anime Club. It was pretty impressive. The production was really cool. The concept behind the series seemed fairly generic, but was taken in some interesting directions. I liked how gross and violent and gory it was. That was kind of neat. Certainly made me pretty interested to check out the manga, but it just didn't end up fitting into our Anime Club schedule. I think it did really well, though. I think this is one of the more popular series from last season. I saw they had a big collab at Uniqlo that was popping off, so, good for them. Windbreaker, we watched the first episode of. I found out later that this really took off and people are really enjoying it, which makes me more curious about it now. Maybe I'll return to it at some point. I found the first episode kind of generic and not super interesting. The MC was just kind of so above and beyond in terms of just like edginess. It almost felt like old school in that regard. Like he seemed like kind of a mid 2000s protagonist. So nothing really captured me about it, but conceptually, I like the idea of, virtuous thugs using their street smarts and battle skills to help out a community. So yeah, I don't know. I'd like to investigate it more. The Spice and Wolf remake I was curious about. It's a kind of beloved cult classic series. I wanted to see how they were going to modernize it with the powers of modern animation and kind of appealing to modern audiences, but again, didn't get a chance, just so many other things. Whisper Me a Love Song, I really would have enjoyed watching. We had a lot of girls making music and being ambiguously lesbian shows this season, but this one was actually just very explicitly a Yuri series, adapted, from a pretty popular Yuri manga, about, lesbians making music. So that seems very much up my alley. I would have loved to get the chance to watch it. I didn't hear like amazing things about it, but, I would have liked to see what the deal is, have a pleasant time. Girls Band Cry is the other in the quadrifecta of Yuri bait music type shows. I think this one was pretty explicit. I think this one actually had like lesbian confession and stuff, if I am to understand what I saw on Twitter. We watched the first episode of this in club, and I was really not impressed. I think especially because we watched it right after Jellyfish Can't Swim at Night, which has like amazing productions and really dramatic moments, and this just felt very flat with like really awkward CG animation. That just honestly was not doing much for me. But then I started hearing like a lot of praise about it, and some of my friends ended up picking it up again and watching it, and saying that they really did a fantastic job. It's kind of like hard for me to picture, just because episode 1 was like so uninteresting and the animation was like so sloppy. But I don't know. I should remain open minded to it. Maybe check it out if I get the chance. Seiyu Radio. This was just kind of a cute slice of life show about Seiyu that do a little radio show. I always like Seiyu shows in general. Girlish Number. What was that other slice of life one? At any rate, just think it's kind of interesting to learn about that career and the way that it intersects with like parody animes that they can come up with and stuff, and just kind of like the rise and struggles and accomplishments of a Seiyu. I think is pretty interesting. I feel like a lot of Seiyu shows just turn into idol shows, though, in some ways. Just kind of weird, but I don't know. So I was curious about this, but again, did not get to it. The Fable I kind of wanted to watch because it is a really cult classic manga that's huge among manga readers. Kind of your 9-point plus on MangaDeck's core series. So I've always wanted to read that, and I thought the adaptation might be really good. I've heard the adaptation is like not so good, and I should just read the manga. And then Sandland. We watched the first episode of this again in club. I had read the manga. when I was a little kid, when it came out in the American Shonen Jump magazine, and I really, really enjoyed it. Like, I think it captures a lot of the stuff I like best about Dragon Ball. It's more like adventurous, lower stakes. The battles are kind of sillier and more around martial arts choreography and not just bow, 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 bow. I love the character designs. I think it really plays to Toriyama's strength and having all these kind of like goofy little monsters and demons running around the desert. You're the desert, baby, between this and Dune and Mad Max. I think there's another desert core thing too. So I was pretty pumped about this, and I had planned on watching it even though we decided not to watch it in club. I really enjoyed the CG animation style for this too. I thought that was a really great fit. Kind of reminded me of the works of Orange. But I don't know, I just didn't get to it. The fact that I had already read the manga made it a little less exciting or enticing, I guess. But at some point, I'd like to check it out. I'd like to play the game, too. The game looks sweet. Okay, all that aside, let's talk about the series that I did watch, starting with Bartender, the Glass of God. So this is a remake of the 2006 anime, which I've heard a lot of acclaim for. I think that's kind of like a seminal cult hit. Which himself is an adaptation of a very long-running, very storied, very beloved manga. As far as I know, the original adaptation, I haven't read the manga or watched the original adaptation, but the original adaptation I've heard is like really weird and has all sorts of like fourth wall breaking and kind of like dream sequences and other just sort of surreal, non-linear, non-literal aspects. And this strips away pretty much all of that and really brings it more in line with the manga. You could call this like Bartender Brotherhood, perhaps. So my impression of this series, you know, having heard of it for quite a while, but never having really engaged with it, is like this episodic thing where you get a little backstory on an unpleasant situation in like an office or something. I got into a big fight with my boss over XYZ. Blah, blah. And then those involved somehow stumble into this bar to be served by the eponymous bartender, and his kind conversation brings out the heart of the issue, and his impeccable mixology skills deliver the perfect remedy. And whatever conflict they had, whatever disagreement, it just is, almost magically resolved by the atmosphere of the bar and his social skills and just how wonderful the drink he prepares is. And it's like mostly like this, and really my favorite parts of the series are when it was really operating in this mode. I appreciated most of all the very low-key one-episode plot lines. I just felt there was a lot of tenderness in telling these stories of people who are kind of down on their luck or facing frustration. And this feeling of kind of like intimacy as we step into their shoes for a little bit. And we as well are sort of healed by the bartender at the end. That's what I was kind of looking for. I like the dynamic of how these drinks served as such a perfect remedy as well. It's always, I decided to make you this cocktail, or I modified your request a little bit to meet whatever you're actually deeply searching for. Sometimes it's like I prepared you a drink that makes you feel really warm inside because I could tell you were shivering, cold, caught in the rain. This is a fun one. It'll brighten your spirits. It'll make you shake off your feelings of out of placeness and let you be comfortable and settle in and enjoy yourself. Or this drink will give you the conviction to do X, Y, Z. I guess because it's really strong. Whatever it is, maybe sometimes it was a little strenuous of a connection, but I really enjoyed that. And you learn a lot about the cocktails, too. I like the educational aspect of it. It covers a lot of pretty famous drinks, but then a lot of obscure drinks, too. And even the famous drinks, he's always, of course, putting a little twist on it. I warmed up the ice. Is that a real one? That doesn't sound right. So the drink's not so cold, and it would pair with your body temperature better. Just all these like tiny little variations I thought were so cool. And the production overall is like pretty plain, just it doesn't have to be anything more. It's not like there's crazy action sequences in this. But they really delighted in making all of the cocktail preparation scenes so intricate, and to show all of the care and passion and consideration that's put into them. And then making the drink look really good after, I wouldn't say I'm like a heavy drinker by any stretch these days, but I like a good cocktail now and then. I really appreciate, I think, a well-made cocktail. and the series had my lips smacking, my mouth watering. But what are they drinking? I, I'm serious now. What are in those glasses? Because there's a lot of stuff I found very odd with this one. For a show that's entirely about alcohol, the alcohol itself is treated in a very fantastical way. Once there's this idea that a drink can be your savior, and this is the titular glass of God they explain in the series, is the concept of a drink that is so well made, so appropriate, delivered to the right person at the right time, that will actually bring someone from the very brink of suicide. Okay, this is what actually the show is actually about, is his quest to achieve the glass of God, which is weird. And then of course that brings the inverse idea with it, that if the bartender fails to meet their needs in that moment, then you're kind of condemning them to death. Like, you have their fate in your hands as the bartender. It comes down to your mixology skills. And that's like really strange, because it almost like implies that these people are coming to the bar like sui generis. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Without any sort of, like, they fell out of the coconut tree, so to speak. And what is notably absent from, any of their complaints or the weight of the world that's bearing down on them or anything like that, never is it because of alcohol. The idea of alcohol, of playing a role in someone being so miserable that, like, maybe they're an alcoholic, maybe they're wasting all their money on booze, maybe it's affecting this or that, or their job or their relationships, that's never ever part of the plot. That's very abstracted. If somebody has a problem with alcohol, that's very distant and in the past, and alcohol in the present is only like a positive. There's also only one incident in the entire series that I can remember where somebody actually appears intoxicated. And this is really strange to me, because every episode is about people drinking. You see probably 5 or 6 at least cocktails prepared and served in every episode. And I can only think of one moment where somebody's actually drunk, and it's like a very extreme situation where they make him drink more so that he'll pass out and stop harassing this woman. And aside from that, it's like, what are they even drinking? It feels like alcohol is just this like mysterious other thing that can really only like solve problems. And if it's capable of creating a problem, it's only because you kind of like screw up the cocktail and the person drinking it isn't happy with it. Otherwise, alcohol is like only benefiting people's lives. And then this was the one that I found like weirdest of all, just in terms of just this like kind of weird incoherence about what it is they're actually depicting. There's this, I don't want to explain the whole plot. Basically, the accumulation is this guy who's been trying to quit smoking, decides in what is meant to be kind of like a heartwarming, sentimental, there's hope for him after all moment. He decides that he'll continue to smoke, but he'll only smoke cigars in this bar. And I think the show is suggesting that you go, it's so nice that everything worked out. And it's just kind of like, well, smoking is bad for you. There was a reason he was trying to quit smoking. And now he just like doesn't. It's so weird. In general, I just had this kind of feeling of like, so many plot lines, so many plot elements, so many depictions of drinking and drinking culture and what a good drink or a bad drink can do for you. I just was left feeling, And I had a similar feeling towards the setting in general, like the depiction of all these bars. So it mostly takes place in what's called a counter bar in Japan, which is just a very small bar where typically only 1 or 2 people are working and maybe only 3 or 4 guests can be served at a time. There's no tables, there's no food. You just sit down at the bar and you ask for drinks. And there's like a real kind of culture and reputation around these sorts of places in Japan. I'm not an expert by any stretch, But I also felt like the mangaka was not an expert in this. There's like some sort of such a suggestion towards this sort of bar culture, and I know like a pretty common facet of them is that just not anybody can wander in off the streets. You typically have to be introduced by someone who's already a regular at the bar and kind of like vetted and then invited back. So it's not, a formal membership in most cases. But a lot of these bars in like Ginza or in Higashima and Kyoto, it's not just like you can just stumble in off the street. And it seems to be that's the kind of bar he's working at, because it's like down in a basement and it's extremely tiny, and I think it's in Ginza. But then people are just wandering off the street all the time. That's like the plot of a lot of episodes. And it just kind of lacks the aura, the whatever you want to pronounce that word as, of how these bars are depicted in other series, or how they feel when you walk past them in real life, or just the reputation and the legacy and the history of them that you read about. Doesn't really feel like it contains any of that. For a counterexample, the series Shima Kosaku, which is about a Japanese businessman, he's always going to places like this, and there's always like this deep aura of where he's kind of allowed to drink and who is he encountering there, and the people who have tended those bars for years and years, and all of the relationships that kind of form in places like that. There's like a weight to it, there's a significance to it, and that just doesn't really exist here. It just sort of feels like this weird genericized engagement with the matter, where this is being used as a setting and like a plot structure, this bar as a place and serving drinks as an activity, but it's kind of stripped away of like the qualities that has in real life, and just sort of used as a generic setting to tell stories that could just as easily be told in any other line of work. You know what I'm saying? And this is the sort of thing I'm going to complain about. I don't think this is a major complaint or anything, because not many series are going to dive into this sort of social analysis, but never once in this entire series is the cost of a drink mentioned. There's no engagement with the idea of different bars being places where different people can afford to drink. The main central thrust is that we're trying to get our main guy, this godly bartender, to work at a hotel bar. And he speaks, very highly, very idealistically about his ideology as a bartender, what he wants to accomplish, this idea of serving the glass of God and helping pull somebody back from the brink. And it's never really breached this question of like, are you going to be able to serve anybody that really needs your help at some like bougie ass bar where you're serving on the 20th floor or whatever, right? Like, I don't know. There's like a lot of things not engaged with that just made it feel kind of hollow. Still though, I did quite like it. As I said, I really liked learning about the cocktails, and a lot of the plot lines were kind of fun. So I'll give it a 7.5. This is just a solid, fine series. Okay. Next, we'll talk about Train to the End of the World. Another in the, so far, pretty consistently excellent genre of girls. Maybe we can include some boys, too, include Heavenly Delusion or something. But people who are sometimes very ill-equipped to be doing so, exploring a post-apocalyptic setting. In this one, shortly before the events of the plot, the Japanese... I was about to say the Japanese government, but that's not quite right. Some people in Japan activate 7G, which of course is 2 steps ahead of our paltry 5G, which instantly causes the world to warp and distort and extend into this hideous anti-wonderland. Trying to find their friend in Ikebiriko, 3 girls from Agano and her dog set out on this train ride. They resurrect an old train and make the long journey into the city. As I said, the world has been stretched out, so a journey that normally would take only an hour or 2 now takes weeks and weeks. Each stop along the line, there's usually some reason they have to hit the brakes, jump out, explore, and have a little adventure. It's pretty different than other works in this mode, largely due to the style of post-apocalypse we're dealing with here, rather than your kind of typical dystopian wasteland. It's this kaleidoscopic Yume Nikki-esque variety show where you could encounter any setting, any type of character, any genre, any tone, any feel. There's no overarching monster type thing. For some reason, a lot of these series feel the need to include just kind of a generic monster that can show up to create tension in every episode, and maybe kind of suggest that an overarching plot line is to like definitively eliminate them. We see this in like Kimono Friends, Other Side Picnic, Heavenly Delusion, although they did it pretty good. And generally I find these just like very uninteresting and pretty boring. Instead, the types of threat in each zone that they encounter are completely different, and they're dealt with in completely different ways each time. Although, I will say, there's a surprising amount of just straightforward ass kicking that I never would have guessed it from the series, but a lot of arcs or, short adventures or whatever you want to call them end with an actual just fight scene, and using the Agano Jujitsu, our protagonists are more than capable of just like kicking ass, which is a lot of fun. There's no gap where our heroes are just sort of like innately more equipped and more knowledgeable about these really mysterious things that they're seeing that we don't comprehend, which is typically kind of a staple of this genre. Here, everybody's on the same page. This was something that happened recently. They haven't explored these areas before. Everybody's seeing everything for the first time. So if you can remember in the past, I've talked a lot about with series like this, building up quadrants of, a column of this is what our characters know, this is what our characters don't know, this is what we know, because often there's a dramatic irony where we recognize things from the pre-apocalypse that they don't know about, and we go, oh my god, they don't know that that's like a nuke or whatever. Creating a 4-quadrant square of knowledge. And I typically do that, and here it just wouldn't really make any sense. It's just a single square of what anyone knows, and it says nothing. It's very refreshingly simple in this regard. The twist will always come at you, like, from the front. There's no creepy, insinuous feeling that there's something you missed, that there's some kind of betrayal approaching where something you had taken for granted turns out not to be true. The train just keeps rolling ahead. You'll see what you see. It's very straightforward and fun in that regard. So this would get my extremely high honor. I'm going to give this the It's Kind of Like One Piece award. I think just in terms of this journeying through different stops type plotline, and the wide variety of settings, and the way that every time they arrive, there's some sort of ongoing conflict, some crisis that's unfolding, that is either aimed at them or aimed away from them, but either way, they kind of get involved. It's basically the overarching structure of One Piece, and One Piece is my favorite manga of all time, so this is pretty high praise. I think if you can tell a story like this well, it's one of the most kind of engaging, consistently fun, and just creatively rich ways to tell a story. So let's talk a little bit about how weird the series gets, and how it wields that weirdness. So at first, given all this, the setting and the potential it held, and this very kind of straightforward exploring it, I was initially a little disappointed at the weirdness levels themselves. Fusfu arcs are like, I don't know, the thing that takes over your consciousness, the Lilliputian, everything is tiny and we're huge, zombies, stuff that's kind of like 101, stuff that appears in almost every kind of fantastical journey story, stuff that appears on kind of like pretty common lists of settings that have some sort of like kind of creepy or horrific element. Pretty 101. There's always a unique spin on it, it's in this good spot between subversive and adversarial, which I think is also very true for One Piece, bolstering the It's Like One Piece award, where they kind of set up some sort of genre expectations, and they do subvert them a little bit and play with them and kind of take you on a unique journey. But it isn't so adversarial that it's like, You wanted a zombie story. Well, fuck you. You don't get anything like that. No, they let you have your fun with zombie tropes as well. But I still wanted like more surreality, some wholly unique things, more concepts that are just totally nonsensical. But it delivered. As you get into the back half of the series, it really started to deliver on this front. I'd say starting in episode 8, things just became this sort of psychedelic nightmare that I had really been hoping for. The franticness with which these bigger concepts were chucked at us and explained to whatever extent they deigned to explain to us. You were given such like a high complex concept rolling into an arc, and then 3 different twists and subversions and warps and explosions are thrown to you on top of that. The pacing just got so insane. It was sheer joy. It reminded me a lot of Rolling Girls, which is a series I absolutely adore. Just in terms of how weird the setups are for something, and then just how powerfully, effectively, compellingly it moves you through a whole little arc taking place inside of that extremely weird setup. And even things that I thought were pretty standard, like the zombies, came back in such a bizarre way, in such like a satisfying, fun way. All of these kind of earlier standard plot lines just got more and more involved. I sort of wish there was more time for this level of madness. Like, I just praised how frantic the pacing was, and I wouldn't really want that pacing to slow down. I just wish there was, like, more. I wish that the series ramped up to this level and then got an entire season to play with concepts that are this bizarre and this nightmarish. Maybe it should have been 2 core, I don't know. The era of original anime getting 2 cores is still very seldom. We can say maybe it's improved a little bit from the nadir, but it's still kind of a pipe dream for a lot of series like this. And on top of this bizarre setting weirdness is a nice blend of tonal weirdness as well. Because sometimes, typically it kind of operates in sort of a slice of life mode. Everybody's kind of cheerful and jolly, but determined, and there's a lot of like banter and just riffing and reminiscing and irreverency. But then sometimes it really switches gears, and the drama between the main characters gets really intense and consequential, with fights that spill over between episodes and weird grudges, and suddenly you're just kind of plunged into this dramatic plot line that you're like, oh god, like this is serious. This is like going to be very important to the plot. I love that. I thought that was really great. It gave kind of this like dark edge to everything. Moreover, sometimes like really horrific things are thrown at you for just like a few frames. There's moments where characters' backstories are explained a little bit, or they relive some traumatic memories just very briefly. And that's just thrown at you. And it's never really explained. But at the same rate as a whole bunch of other like really weird things are thrown at you that you sort of expect to be inconsequential. People throw away lines mentioning quantum mechanics, just all sorts of strange invocations of like real world theories about like the Big Rip and stuff, and quantum foaming, and then just all sorts of like really bizarre imagery and scenes and shots that are like totally dissociated with everything else. It's pretty nuts. and you're really just kind of left to sort through all of this yourself. You got to figure out what's gonna matter, what's like a red herring, what is just sheer nonsense. And on top of all of this, shoutouts to the villain. This is one of my favorite villain motivations in a long time. Like, why he's doing everything he's doing, I think is so funny. I don't want to spoil it or anything, but it really fits into this just sort of like bizarre, and you are given kind of the inevitably failing task of sorting through what everything means. So yeah, this was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed this one. Original series kind of came out of nowhere, but really impressed me. I'll give this a 9. Okay, next we're going to talk about Go Go Loser Ranger. It's had a whole bunch of different titles. This is the one that I associated with. Maybe you've heard of this one. It has a really fantastic premise, I think. I don't want to spoil it because the way it's revealed to you, I think, is really, really interesting. But if you had kind of just heard this depicted as like a Sentai parody where one of the typical mob villains is thrust into the role of MC, but it's actually a lot more interesting than that. There's a lot of very cool twists of premises kind of subverted on top of other subverted premises that I really, really enjoyed. It kind of reminded me of Decadence, which is a series I really liked from a few years ago. Whereas the kind of twist in the premise really pulled the rug out from under you. It was just so shocking and abrupt. Here, it builds up your expectations that pretty early on, it probably clicks that this might be what the premise is. And then very explicitly, bit by bit, it just kind of feeds you clues that keep suggesting, that theory might be accurate. And then when it's finally fully explicitly explained to you, it's very, very cathartic and very, very satisfying. And then you're just kind of excited to see how all this stuff is going to play out. I was very, very excited by this premise. I thought it was hilarious and rich with opportunity. And I thought they were just going to kind of stick to that mode, iterating on the way that this world works, on the structure of this Sentai show. And then they just kind of iterate at that and then escalate that. And then maybe it has some sort of big revolutionary climax. Instead, it switches gears very, very quickly. And it starts to become very involved and dives layers deeper into its own premise. So instead of just kind of like operating with the premise being, the thing that you're invested in and the thing that you're interested in, that just becomes the foundation for a much more complicated story. So I think this is very much a like, oh, the manga's doing good, so let's like kind of throw in some more arcs and stuff. Hey, it looks like we can actually run this for years and years and years maybe, instead of, having to kind of show off our premise, execute on it, and give a satisfying ending within 20 chapters. We have hundreds to play with. Which, is like good for them. I think that's the right thing to do. If you have a premise and a setting and characters that people like, then yeah, build it out, flesh it out, make it into a franchise, make it into something that people can really latch onto and love. And honestly, the arc that this series ends up mostly comprising of, which we'll get into a bit more later, is pretty good too. It has good characters, good action, and it ultimately builds back into the more substantial premise relevant story. Like, it has implications that matter on the most fundamental levels of what the show is about. So, I don't know, I'm like overall pretty happy, very happy with the overall plot execution. But I think it also exemplifies a sort of lost in the sauceness that we're going to investigate. So the question that I find myself asking with a lot of anime that kind of have premises like this, or just stories in general, manga, whatever, is how many layers must I care through? That if the premise of the series is like A, and then we're being told about like A.2, A.3, A.3.2, all of these kind of like other iterations and layers built on top of it. If I really, though, was just sort of enticed and hooked by the premise, how many layers do I have to go back through before I get stuff that's like relevant to that speaks to the appeal of that? So this arc, and I hope this isn't too much spoilers or anything, but basically it's about somebody who's undercover, living the life of somebody else, having to pretend that they're them, and the person they're pretending to be is taking a big exam. So they too have to take the exam. So it's our fish out of water undercover MC. He has to fit in and pass this combat exam. And this is really the substantial part of the series. Like, I think the last 6 or 7 episodes are set doing this. So it's a very sensible plot construction, if you're trying to do this more substantial world building and just sort of draw out the potential length of the manga. I think this is a great way to go about it. It teaches you about the society from an outsider perspective. It makes the other side, those opposed to our MC, kind of feel a little more sensible, a little more understandable. You can introduce a whole swath of characters and put them in a situation where they all have to be relevant and you're kind of just free to explore them. It lets you have a lot of consequential fights, consequential to the fate of the exam, without the threat of death. So you can keep all of the characters around very plausibly. And it sets up some sort of perspective shifts for the MC. That suddenly he's introduced to this whole other slice of society. And I think in the manga, I would just be like, wow, yeah, very well done. Like, I think this would just sort of impress me in its construction and its placing and timing if I was reading this month by month in a manga or something. But here in the anime, when I've been so hooked by the premise, on my mind, I'm just thinking, like, we only have 12 episodes. What are you doing? Let's get back to the good stuff. Let's get back to the really crazy stuff that's at the heart of the premise. And I think I just probably had lingering resentment around exam arcs because of the really annoying, very middling Frieren exam arc, which took way too long and was boring as hell. The issue is just that you're just so abstracted from what you really care about. Like I said, there's just so many layers separating you. Like, presumably you're caught up in the premise. You want to see what will unfold with the premise. And this exam is like, because of the premise, the MC has this scheme, which has a setback, and the setback then leads to this disguise. And this disguise, just to maintain the disguise, and, abstractly that will help the scheme eventually, it is necessitated that he has to, like, take and pass this exam. And so, and the result is that the climax of, like, multiple episodes really only has bearing on the exam, It's only mattering on this level, which comes down to will his undercover person, the person he's pretending to be able to pass this combat exam. And it's just kind of like, why do I care? What is this show again? What happened to the really cool premise and all of the stuff kind of promised by that? I would say a counterexample to this is the Naruto Chunin exams, which is just kind of a famously good shonen arc, one that a lot of people, even if they aren't big Naruto fans, like I wouldn't call myself a big Naruto fan, almost everybody points to that arc as just being like a real masterpiece of battle shonen arc writing. The difference is that in that series, passing that exam was the biggest thing on Naruto's mind. Our MC personally cared so much about achieving that certification for all sorts of reasons that are bound up in his character, in his personality, in his goals, and the trajectory of the series. So we cared about the actual outcomes of the exams and stuff. The fact that there was all sorts of other things going on and the way that the exams grew into future arcs and had all this foreshadowing and twists and stuff, that was just kind of like the cherry on top. We already cared. Whereas this, I didn't care about this exam at all until that sort of interference started happening, until the scope started widening. And again, it's like, it's fine. And this arc, I think, was well done. But it's just like everything else was more interesting. Because this show has so many really cool things going for it. And it just felt like such a waste of potential to see multiple episodes spent just watching guys fighting in a parking lot and not really much was happening. But yeah, like I said, the show has a lot of really cool stuff. Here is some other praise that I just didn't have space for in the previous slides. The action scenes were really well done, I thought. Very flashy, very kinetic. I think really good use of CG to just kind of have a type of fluid choreography that is a little too ambitious or outside of the scope of animation. I think they handled that sort of blend really, really well. All sorts of surprises in the fight scenes too. It just sort of leaps in aesthetic directions or strategic directions. The way the personalities came through always surprised me, kept me excited. It's a really good blend of stuff that I associate with Sentai. Not that I've seen a ton of Sentai, but when I am shown a cool Sentai action scene, it kind of has qualities I overlap with this. Orange style CGI choreography, again, just that really fluid, CGI only type movement. Lots of character personality shining through. Really awesome effects work, just so flashy and exciting and kind of like ufotable style. I gotta highlight though, again, that all of the non-exam fight scenes were way cooler than all of the fight scenes that were happening during the exam. As like a non-fan appreciator, that is, I don't actively watch Sentai stuff, but I think it's pretty neat and I like to learn about it. I have a friend who's into Sentai who tells me stuff about it, and I think that's really cool. So it was really cool to see how much this series loves Sentai as well. All the different references to it, just sort of the tropes that it kind of manifests and subverts, the expectations it assumes you have. Even though I didn't really have those expectations personally, the whole series kind of had that aura where you just sort of knew what mode it was operating in and knew that it was operating in this rich tradition. I could sense that there was a lot of like Easter eggs and stuff that I didn't even notice. I love seeing the legacy of this entire genre, movement, whatever you want to call it, being brought to bear on such a cool and unique premise. Having these deeper entries working around Sentai expectations was super cool. What did I mean by that? I wrote these a while ago. I guess just referring to, yeah, like these kind of deep cuts that they can allude to. Just the aura and the depth of that, I think, is really neat. But yeah, I think what really landed for me, though, of course, is I understand like how Sentai series work. I understand how the characters are set up and stuff, and the power scaling around the monsters and the heroes and their weapons and transforming forms and all of that. So I could kind of recognize the clues they were giving us and the cues they're giving us for like fight scenes and stuff in evoking those tropes and images. Overall, the series just had such a really cool attitude. I felt like it really built its own aesthetic language. Everything from the really intensely inspirational opening, which I've watched a whole bunch of times in isolation. I think it's so good. To the silly but still somehow very cool ED, where they're all just doing like a choreographed dance routine. To the goofy felt doll outro sequences, which felt very kind of old school, like almost 90s anime in their just total reverence to the seriousness of the plot that they were interjecting in. To this intense juxtaposition of the really toy-like Sentai designs with sometimes like really kind of shocking, brutal, unpleasant violence. I really felt like something fresh. It felt like something new that I truly hadn't seen before. I feel like I really got to jump on the manga. I think they already announced the second season. I'd like to watch that too. I thought this adaptation was just fantastic, but I really got to get current with the manga. I got to see where this whole thing is going. Okay. I would give this an 8.5. I quite liked it. Whew, I'm getting sweaty. Talking about manga. It's hard work. We still got so much to go. Alright, next. The Demon Slayer latest season, the Hashira training arc. Alright, oh baby, oh boy, let's go. It's more Demon Slayer. This was the first of 3 bonus shows. So basically we watched 5 of these shows. Am I counting right? Oh yeah. We watched 5 of these shows in DDR Club, which I fell behind on for a while because of like Japan and just being unavailable a lot of Wednesday nights and blah blah blah. So I was like marathoning a whole bunch of stuff to get caught up on that. And then I realized that there's 3 other shows that we weren't watching in Club that I wanted to watch. Shows that are like very, very important to me that we'll all speak about at some length later. And the first one we'll talk about is Demon Slayer. So yeah, basically after I got up on Club Anime and after we basically finished all of Club Anime, I had like a very intensive anime watching marathon of just those 3 remaining shows. And I just kind of like cycled through them until I was done each of them. So the last season of Demon Slayer, you may recall, I had some beef with the Swordsmith Village. You can go back and watch my review on that. But basically, just found a very monotonous, endless fighting with fake out after fake out after fake out. Whoosh! Ah, you got him. You got the Oh no, that was a fake body. Whoosh! Ah, just kidding. He teleported. Whoosh! Just kidding. He teleported again. And every time they put so much energy and budget and Sakuga into the slash, and it just feels like they're toying with you. So many fake outs. And then, to spice things up, we get the flashback backstories of all of the characters involved. And I found all of these very boring and tedious and with really no surprises. No levity, no comedic relief, no real changes to the art style. In the form of like face faults or scenes set in the imagination or anything like that. Very few ideas beyond what is kind of first established about the demons and their powers. It's just fighting, 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 fighting. In this season, I feel like the pendulum swings very, very, very far in the extreme other direction. This is almost wholly a training arc, so the consequences are a lot less severe. Nobody's gonna die. The stakes are lower. There's a wide range of tonality. Sometimes these training sequences are very funny. Sometimes they're just sort of warm and sentimental. Sometimes they're extremely intense and mean-spirited, violent. And all of this is really facilitated by each Hashira having such an extreme personality. And I think they did a good job of just sort of showing how powerful and extreme these Hashira are by having each of their sequences be like totally colored by just their attitude and the way they express themselves. And there's a nice range of activities for each training camp as well. They're not just doing the same thing in and out. It's a lot of sword fighting with wooden swords, sure. But they managed to keep it fresh, keep it rolling across a whole bunch of different activities. And a lot of unique interludes to this kind of weird, consistent trend of Tanjiro challenging them to some totally irrelevant duel at the end of the training, like making paper airplanes. Some nice moments there. Something, to break up the pace, to break up the monotony. And so much goofy comedic relief. I swear to God, some episodes were over 50% face fault, where, the distorted, goofy, over-the-top animation shifts were actually taking up more time than just the normal animation. So I don't think this is a coincidence that everything I was complaining about got completely 180'd in the next arc. Likely, when the manga was running, it received similar feedback from editors and readers, and that's why they steered this way. So yeah, this stuff generally works for me. I appreciate this a lot more than the last arc. I would rather a variety of wacky things happening with basically no stakes than extremely severe stakes kind of brutalizing you for hours and hours. I mean, it was a little inconsequential, a little meandering, but a lot of good moments. And man, I love the Stone Hashira. I just think this character is so awesome. I love the way he's introduced. I love the way he's like spoken about, the way his personality and his power kind of precedes him. I just love the way he interfaces with everybody. This running gag of him bursting into tears over everything. He's so great. I love everything about him. Even his flashback had a twist I didn't foresee, which is maybe the first time in all of Demon Slayer that the flashback contained something I didn't foresee. It's pretty brutal. And I know the series has kind of a reputation for just like brutal, despairing, violent flashback after flashback after flashback, that everybody has this like tearjerker backstory. And I was getting like pretty tired of it, I'll be honest. I found that very taxing. But this one kind of got me. This one I actually found pretty devastating because of a twist I didn't foresee coming. Okay, so like I said, this is kind of meandering and almost feels a little bit pointless, right? Like, it's a training arc. Not really anything happens until the very end. And I think this is very highlighted and difficult to negotiate if you're an anime-only fan, due to the way that this adapts the manga. So I've cited many times before that Demon Slayer is a major turning point for shonen adaptation. Before this, a company like Toei would just kind of crank out very low budget, very filler filled episodes 365 days a year for series like One Piece and Naruto and Bleach. And it's like, they weren't terrible. They captured a lot of what people like about the manga. They're obviously very, very popular. They still got some people into the series in the first place. But they weren't really cinematic. They didn't really have too much original ideas in terms of the production. They didn't really have much like Sakuga to speak of. And so this was a big, big shift in mentality when Demon Slayer started, and also Boku no Hero Academia around the same time, that it's like, hey, we've got this big hit manga on our hands. Instead of just kind of like phoning it in and making the default anime experience of that, why don't we elevate it? Why don't we get like a really critically acclaimed studio and push it to its limit and make it flashy and cinematic and exciting? Let's throw a whole lot of money in it. Let's just do it in seasons of 12 episodes and take breaks instead of needing to crank out filler arcs. Let's really, really tightly stick to the manga. Like, let's not skip things. Let's not add unnecessary things. Let's just give a faithful, honest adaptation that will appeal to the fans, but moreover, bring in tons and tons of new audiences. And it worked. Demon Slayer was a huge, huge success as an anime, especially after Infinity Train movie came out. Good lord, that thing made like $1 trillion. So this became the new normal for adaptations. This is kind of how we assume now that a hit shonen manga will be adapted when it comes time to adapt it. It's been true for Jujutsu Kaisen. It's been true for Chainsaw Man. It's been true for Dandadan coming up. Pretty much any that you can think of since Demon Slayer has operated in this mode. But I think some contradictions are starting to emerge in this philosophy. And it makes sense that Demon Slayer would kind of hit this first as being one of the first ones. I suppose you could trace it even further back to Attack on Titan. Attack on Titan isn't like a jump manga or even really what you would think of as a shonen manga. But at any rate, Attack on Titan also ran into this, I would say. And Demon Slayer is currently really running into this. Which is like, if you're trying to make a super flashy, cinematic, high impact, super intense series, the manga isn't really like that all the time. I haven't read the Demon Slayer manga, but I've read, hundreds of battle shonen at this point. So I get how it works. I can tell. Like every big, long-running battle shonen, the intensity ebbs and flows across arcs. You're going to have long runs of chapters that are much less consequential than other ones. There's going to be times where the mangaka is just chilling and kind of preparing future arcs, and the current stuff that's running is just, filler isn't quite the right word, but it's like operating on a different gear. And the anime understands this to some extent. Most of the previous seasons did have some kind of lower key episodes that focused on training or just world building or character interaction. Moments of comic relief, some moments of real cathartic peace. But whenever there's any sort of adversity, any fight, any conflict, any intense training, anything, because of just this sort of feeling that what you're putting out there, what people are watching, has to be like cinema level, extremely intense, extremely hype, event worthy anime. It's like, oh well, if this is a training arc, this training arc's got to get dialed up to 12. This has to be the most intense training arc you have ever seen. This has to be a training arc that will make you weep and stand and applaud. It's just like, it just makes things so exhausting. I think it starts to diminish the impact of this production style. If you have a big climactic fight against a demon, and they whip out all sorts of like crazy camera angles and effects and stuff, and then they do the same thing when it's just kind of like random sparring or shoving a boulder, it really starts to make the whole thing kind of feel excessive and not that interesting. I don't know what the solution is here though. Cuz I honestly think what they should do is in the same way that a long training arc like this in the manga is sort of like a strategic move where the series, I mean, coasts is maybe a little rude, but again, it just sort of moves into a lower gear and prepares for more intense stuff coming up. Again, a very valid and useful strategy for long running manga. Do the same thing in the anime. Dial it back. Make it less over the top. Make it less crazy. Make it simpler. Make it look like old toy adaptations. But of course, fans will get mad and say it looks like crap and it's boring and whatever. But then they rack it up the intensity and it just seems like so pointless and weird and almost off-putting. But of course, they can't really deviate from the manga either. If they cut anything or truncate anything or rush through anything, people are also going to get mad. It has to stay super, super faithful. So I don't know. I think this is just sort of an inevitable roadblock with adapting a long-running manga series in this style. You're going to have to confront arcs like this, and I just don't know if there's any good way to do them. Luckily, the Studio Wit remake of One Piece will not have this problem. Not to say that Oda does not operate in this mode of shifting gears. He certainly does. I just think he's a master at it, and that the episodes, like the arcs and stuff that are actually lower gear in terms of intensity, still just have a whole lot of fun and exciting stuff going on, you know? So I think they'll be able to make it work. I don't know. Hopefully. Maybe. We'll see. At any rate, the last episode of this, though, that was the one that deserved to be in this insane cinematic factor. That delivers on kind of the level of intensity that this series demands on itself. It was one that had the plot line to match. Pretty crazy. Certainly made me excited for the movies. I don't know. It's gonna take years. We're still so far away from the finale. They're gonna go 3 movies, and they're all probably gonna make, again, trillions of dollars. So they're gonna get spaced out. Long theatrical runs. We're still in for a lot more Demon Slayer, for better or worse. But this one, I would say, was a little better. Definitely better than last time. Had a lot more fun watching it. Love the Stone Hashira. I'll give it a 7.5. Alright. Next, let's talk about Jellyfish Can't Swim at Night, Yokokura. This is some sort of like artist project anime from the eponymous / pseudonymous Jelly. Like a whole bunch of stuff is credited to Jelly when you look up where this anime came from. And it's about these 4 girls with 4 different skills teaming up to put out music and accompanying visuals. Their goal is to build up a fan base, etc., etc. You've seen series like this before. I don't really understand the extent to which these are like real people. I think it's like basically 0. I think Jelly was like this sort of entity that was formed to produce the anime. And again, it represented like a consolidation of talents of character design and animation and music and all the different facets of music and blah, blah, blah. I don't think the characters actually map to any real people in there, though. But still, it really felt like, even though I think that's the case, I might be wrong, it still kind of felt like they were real people to some extent. It had this sort of aura of the characters being built and loved from within. I don't know if I can explain that very well, but it balanced it very well without also being like hagiography. It isn't just about, wow, and we're so wonderful, which a few of these other kind of like creator-inspired series are. So these 4 girls and trying to achieve these dreams are all running around the nightscape of Shibuya. Some of my favorite stuff was in this mode, this feeling of chance encounters and just this limitless potential lurking in the confluence of people in this dense urban space. Nicely contrasted with emotional moments, looking at what lies beyond Shibuya, what is still yet to be made in Shibuya, and this feeling of harshness that emerges in Shibuya, and how competitive it is, how fast paced it is. It was a really balanced and complete portrayal of the setting of this city, which I found very compelling. Our four girls were overall, I think, really excellently written, compelling, three-dimensional. I love the focus on their identities and their anxieties. It felt really real without like conflicting with their skill sets. Like it made sense that they would still have these hang-ups and these things they needed to work through, while also being like extremely talented and experienced and motivated at what they do. Those two things like never felt at odds with one another, which I think is sometimes kind of common. Oh wow, you're such a talented idol. Yeah, but I have anxiety, and it's kind of like, okay, but then how are you such a talented idol? Sometimes I think if this isn't written very carefully and the characters aren't really fleshed out, it just sort of like stumbles over itself. And they weren't like one and done either. I really, really like this sort of character writing where you're kind of introduced to them and maybe some major stumbling block or hesitation in their life is resolved in that kind of first arc. But things are more just kind of getting peeled back layer by layer. And each kind of insecurity that's dealt with only creates another complex that kind of encompasses that needs to be dealt with. It reminds me sort of the Monogatari series, where they sort of set up this expectation that it's like, we're going in to solve a problem. But very realistically and very compellingly, you realize that there's many, many layers to that problem. I think I just hit the mic with the fan. I hope that wasn't stupidly loud. Every time it's very satisfying and cathartic, but it feels incomplete. It's very tellingly and suggestively incomplete, that you know there's still things they need to address. Great side characters too. There's one character with an aspect, I don't need to get into the details or whatever, but a little revelation you learn about them. I don't think I've ever seen an anime before. I don't think I've ever seen a character that has had this in anime, and I thought that was really kind of cool and interesting. There's a couple like kind of unique character archetypes that are explored in a very compassionate and motivating way, that I really do not remember really encountering in any sort of similar genre before, which I thought was really cool. But what I think really works for me about this show is that it's carefully blended from three genres. There's a deep, character-driven drama where the rawest, fragilest, outermost feelings of our girl must carefully be untangled. And this is, your big emotional outbursts, revelations, promises, vows as they ride this roller coaster of self-actualization. And this is kind of the main mode. This is the main plot. This is what's driving us forward. Often ending with this really smoldering message, I would say. Probably the overarching lesson of this series is characters buckling down and resolving to work harder for their dreams. Taking inspiration from one another and using that to double down on their aspirations. And that's okay. I actually quite like that. I think it's very motivating and very like lively and compelling. You could argue maybe there's some unhealthy readings to this, but in terms of problematic things this series is doing, there's others that are higher on this list that we'll get to. The other mode, and it actually spends the majority of the actual runtime in this mode, is actually just kind of like a sitcom. It's a genuinely funny sitcom. There's a lot of great twists of disappointment, unexpected and consequential callbacks, confluences of goofy characters, and nice episodic messaging where each little adventure kind of teaches them something that they take with them into their greater personal projects. The way these side stories are woven into the characters' worldviews, I think, is really top-notch. And this is something that a lot of sitcoms do, and it just feels very on the nose and transparent of, hey, this thing that's kind of unrelated to us, isn't that actually teaching a lesson to us about ourselves? This is something that is now kind of lampshaded more than it's done sincerely on sitcoms. I think just because it's hard to write that in a subtle, meaningful way. But they do a good job here. And And yeah, I don't know. It's just like genuinely funny. There's so many plot lines and little twists and callbacks, and I wouldn't even know where to start with examples, but I was cracking up with some of these revelations. And then of course it's also an idol show, with really brilliant performances and montages. You know, just the feeling of everything they're achieving being woven together and brought to bear on these performances, these music video releases. Oh man, I gotta get a Tums or something. we're like a third done, by the way. There's there's a lot more to talk about. 1 second. Oh, here they are. Well, I didn't have to go anywhere. Whew. See, I don't know. It's like the sort of like idol pop music doesn't really do much for me. I wouldn't say any of their songs were like big bangers for me. But the way these performances were built up and protected as meaningful climaxes to like whole multi-episode arcs. And always given like big impact, big ramifications for everything that's going to follow each performance. That really impressed me. I think the way that it structured itself as like an idol show, as a show that's kind of around building up and preparing for performances and then having that be the really consequential things, just like another series that we're going to talk about later, they did a really good job. Really well. They did that really well. They did that a really good job. Oh, man. We're getting through it. We're getting through it. So much anime to talk about. But yeah, not only did they have these 3 very well executed ideas, but they were all balanced and distributed to make it a very smoothly engrossing watch. What amazed me too is how well these were represented in production. Overall, I thought the production on the show was great. I think it's one of the high points of Dogakobo so far, because they did so much tailoring to just the mood and the feel of each scene. The dramatic scenes and performances were really cinematic, like top-tier Dogakobo stuff on par with like Oshi no Ko, I would say. They knew when to ease off the gas and switch modes into kind of like a slice-of-life production when that was most appropriate, when the stakes were lower, when it was just kind of good vibes and laughs. Just something that Demon Slayer could have done too, but it didn't really. Couldn't all be good though. Here we go. I've got Pleaf with some plot developments. and it isn't the trans-related subplot. If you heard that there's a trans character in the series, that's true. And I thought that was done actually really well. It was foreshadowed in a compelling way, in a way that made even more sense in retrospect. That was done, I think, very nicely, subtly, gradually, with a lot of good hints, and then kind of the climaxes around it I found very powerful and quite relatable. I was actually very happy. It gets a trans person's seal of approval. Good job. So no, it wasn't that. It's sort of similar to the beef I had with Oshi no Ko, but nowhere near as evil. Like maybe only like 10% as evil. So don't worry. We won't talk about it to the lengths that we did Oshi no Ko, and I'm not gonna get that upset. Essentially, and this is maybe minor spoilers, so if you're really adamant that you're gonna watch this and you don't want to know anything more, then skip ahead. But our main girl has some deep trauma around her mom, because her mom basically abandoned her. And then our other main girl is asked by main girl's mom, by that mom, if she wants to collaborate on a big project. And she's basically like, I know she's got big trauma with her mom, but this is like a big project. This is a big opportunity, and I'm insecure about my skills as an artist. So I guess I gotta do it. And of course, this leads to like a huge, devastating blow up. And it's not really resolved. It's just like, oh, well, really, nobody did anything wrong. And I love my mom for some reason. Like, it's so much of this, like, weird reverse causality, like, it... There's total, like, vibes-based resolution where it's like, well, we're happy, and, like, a good thing happened, so it just, like, doesn't matter anymore. I'm, like, cool with it now. I honestly kind of felt like I missed an episode or something. Like, it just didn't really make any sense that everyone stopped being upset about this. Like, basically what happens is the magic of their song getting a whole bunch of views made it so that everything was actually good. Keno was treated like absolute shit by everybody, but the concert was a success. So it's fine. None of those things were actually a problem because they resulted in this successful concert. And of course, this is something that it shares with Oshinoko as just like a deep fundamental hypocrisy that's never addressed, let alone resolved. There's like a deranged fan culture that in the past destroyed Kano, that is weaponized and manipulated to destroy Kano. But again, of course, in the end, those are the only people who matter. Because they applauded at the concert and brought blue umbrellas and watched the video a bunch and left nice comments and gave it a bunch of views. Because she's back in their good graces, that's the only thing that matters. Even though they were being psychotic and horrible, and you would think that what she learned is that she should stop caring about popularity among those horrible, degenerate people. No. It's that she wants their approval. And same with her mom. Her mom is a demon woman, but it's good in the end that her mom was proud of her. Like, what the hell is this? So we can, like, kind of analyze the morality of it and stuff, but I think the real problem was just that they tried to execute this sort of plotline in the first place. I think this messaging and stuff wasn't really the intent. It was just sort of an inadvertent consequence that they sort of stumbled onto because they wrote themselves a plot line that didn't really make any sense to begin with. And why didn't it really make much sense to begin with? Because it was forced drama. This is an old buzzword that used to get thrown around on A all the time. And, you know, I'm just kidding here. But if I wanted to be really rude, I could bust out another really old A buzzword that I remember being applied to a lot of Doga Kobo shows way back in the day. Forced animation. But I'm just kidding. Forced animation was always just a meme. But forced drama, I think this is actually like a good example of what people mean by forced drama. So they wanted to make the big climactic challenge, the final hurdle that the group has to overcome, something interpersonal, something that threatens the entire project of their group, of their entire friendship. You know, everything that's like fundamental and core to the series was put at risk by this latest crisis. So it couldn't just be something external. It couldn't just be like, I don't know, a deadline or a budgetary thing or whatever. It had to be a deep fundamental conflict between the members of the group. Sure, that makes sense. And they also wanted to pay off this backstory of Kana's trauma, her troubled past. Makes sense. That's something they've kind of been teasing out slowly throughout the entire series, so that has to be part of the climax. So this is just kind of like maybe the first idea anyone would think of, I guess, that manages to pull all those elements together. And what makes it so forced to me, though, is that in order for this plotline to happen, so many characters have to act like so ridiculously. Like, why did Miharu think that Kano would be okay with this? Like, why even for a second did she assume that? Why does she want to do it? Is it because she's insecure about her art and she thinks this will give her a chance to, like, level up? Because the mom has, like, good criticism and feedback or something? Does she just want to get a lot of views? there's sort of this like transcendental superiority of getting views. All is justified if it gets views. I kept waiting for some sort of like subversion, some twist, someone to uncover something more, either about like Kano's backstory or Miharu's motivations, or for Miharu to come to her senses and realize that her relationship with Kano is more important than this. You know, it's something more. But it's like, again, they keep adhering to this supremacy of the cruel, arbitrary idol industry over any of their independent efforts. You know, nothing beats the power of money. Nothing matters more than views. That is like the message. That is what makes it like all work out in the end. That is the only thing that in any way justifies the way that Miharu is acting. What really matters in the climax, you know, the dream fulfillment, the wonderful afterword where we kind of check in on all of our characters and see how they're all living their best lives. Why is all of that only enabled and empowered by just totally capitulating to the demands and supremacy of like these really truly despicable characters? Was I meant to think that they weren't so despicable? Like, I'm genuinely baffled. Like, I just really don't know how I'm supposed to parse this. Like, I really don't get it. Like, please tell me if I missed something. Like, the characters just start acting so irrationally all of a sudden, and it's baffling to me. So what could they have done instead? Okay? That fulfills their requirements of dealing with Kano's troubled past and having a major interpersonal conflict right at the climax. Yuri. I'm not kidding. I think if they weren't such cowards and they just went for it, there's a really excellent Yuri story here to be told. They bait it super, super hard and really unambiguously in episode 5. But it's just baiting. Because after that, it just really diminishes, and there's kind of nods to that potential and nods to that pairing, and they're given a few sporadic moments of like intimacy and stuff. But it becomes more and more generic and less impactful, and more you realize that this is not going to amount to anything and was just baiting. And it's like, okay. So, like, why couldn't they have the interpersonal conflict be about this? Miharu struggles to understand and accept Kano's feelings for her. She feels uncomfortable being so close with her, and this leads her to reach out to other projects, ultimately still using that as a bridge to give them the ultimate performance opportunity and reconnect with Kano, right? Can basically have all the same beats, except that now there is a reason. This is key when you are writing a story, is that people do things for reasons. For Miharu to be a little disregarding of Kano's feelings because she feels so uncomfortable and unsure about Kano's love for her, that she then, you know, is like, I want to take a step back from the group. I've just been given this opportunity. I want to pursue something else. That would be reasonable. And everything else can still play out the same. Like, and maybe this could be the troubled past of Kano as well. I think her current troubled past plotline is really stupid. And instead, I think it would be a lot more intimate and respectful of the character and meaningful and interesting if it was that she caught feelings for one of the other idols in her idol group, and that caused her to quit. And the rumors around that made her kind of leave in disgrace. It's still traumatic for her. She's still worried about what this means when she has feelings for someone. Will this be accepted? And her mom still kind of acts shitty that she didn't handle the situation better. But this makes, you know, her co-idols, her former co-idols and her mom maybe like 1,000% less shitty if Kano left with her on her own accord, just among these rumors, and it was just like, geez, unfortunately we weren't able to handle this better. You know, it still provides her with the same kind of backstory and the same distance from her mom and stuff, but in a way where the characters aren't just like horrible demon women. It's more of just this like mutual awkwardness and dishonesty rather than stupid idol scandal shit where Kano was just 1000% in the right the whole time. And I don't even think the series disagrees with that. Like, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. Am I meant to find like her former co-idol character sympathetic? Because she's not. To me, she's like not. And I don't really even get clues from the series that I'm supposed to find her sympathetic. Keno is just in the right the entire time. And it's like Mahiro could even still work for the mom in this setup. Because instead of it being this like horrible demon woman that completely betrayed her only daughter, instead it's just this sort of like awkward relationship that they haven't been able to patch up. And Keno's like, I feel weird about this, but I can't really stop you. And Mahiru's like, I don't really get why you feel weird around your mom because you're being cagey with your feelings. It would all be so reasonable. Wouldn't this be nicer? I mean, putting aside whether or not you like Yuri, whether or not you wanted a romantic plotline, this isn't the only idea they could have taken. It's just an idea that, again, isn't like the first and worst idea you come up with. Like, honestly, I don't even care if this ends with them getting together. It could be that they decide we're artists together, and it's deeper than any sort of romantic connection. And what I truly love about you is your artistic talent. And that's reciprocated, and that sort of respect is reciprocated, and it doesn't even become romantic. I think that would be a wonderful ending. Oh, it's so frustrating. But it's like, literally, they're just cowards. Like, this could not have happened, because no matter how far we get, no matter how Yuri series that are explicitly Yuri with a Yuri audience are getting adapted almost every season now, but that doesn't matter. There's still a deep cowardliness, even though we get other sorts of representations, even though we get a fairly explicitly trans character that's treated with a lot of respect and a lot of care for her story. His story, I guess? That's a little ambiguous, but whatever. Anime is cowardly. They won't drop a Yuri twist. They won't go that far. They'll just bait. That's still the case in the overwhelming majority of cases. They just don't want that heat, and it sucks. But I'll still give this a 9. I still think just it's very, very well done, and the number of really beautiful scenes and beautiful messages vastly outweighs this one just like bafflingly incoherent, incompetent plot line. Everything else was great, so I'll give it a 9. Alright. So, let's talk about Dungeon Meshi. It is time for my favorite tabletop RPG inspired fantasy series ever. Ever. It's like a top 10 manga of all time for me. I mean, think about this. Like, I'm not trying to like blow my own horn here. I'm trying to blow Dungeon Meshi's horn. I've read a lot of manga, okay? You probably do not know of many people that have read more manga than me. I've read probably like 1,000 series, I would think. And this is top 10. That's top 1%. Top 10 of all time for me. Watching it rise the ranks of like manga fan prestige as the series just got crazier and crazier, more and more interesting, as it accumulated more and more of a fandom among manga readers. So satisfying. And this supremely satisfying finale. One of those just truly great manga endings. And I don't think I'm in any sort of minority on that opinion. I think it was just an ending that delivered on everybody's expectations in such a wonderful way. And then right around the same time as the finale, an anime adaptation announced by Trigger, and it's going to be 2 core. And then right away we knew the second season was coming as soon as the first season finished. They're going to do the whole thing. They're going to adapt the whole manga on Netflix, so even normies can watch, but not batch released. Thank fucking God. On a weekly cadence, we got to enjoy this series for 24 weeks, for a full half year, and we're gonna get to do that again. And of course, Trigger knocked it out of the park. and audiences reciprocated that love and that joy. It's such a phenomenon now. So many people love it. I see people talking about it on Twitter all the time. So many of my friends started watching it. I, of course, tried to get as many people as I could into it. I'd been recommending the manga for years and years before this, but of course the anime is going to cast an even wider net, and it's just living up to like every hope and dream I had for it as a success. So much so that it hit this status of meme good. And if you want to know what I mean by that, go back on the channel a week or two. I made a long video talking about the Charlie album Brat and how Brat has become meme good. And that's not a disparaging term. I just mean that it's so good that there's like a meme that exists that about it being good. And then, of course, you know, the inevitable backlash of, the Dunmeshi fanbase is so annoying. The anime come-latelys are annoying. The people who think of Leos as this kind of character are annoying. Everything about it is annoying. I am never going to watch this series on principle because the fanbase is so annoying. Blah, 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 blah. Who cares? Go on, keep hating. I'm gonna keep eating good. I'm loving all of this. I'm loving the memes, even the memes that are stupid. I'm loving the fan art, even the fan art that really doesn't represent the characters very well. I'm loving all the really good memes and fan art that have come out of it too. I'm loving all the discussion. I'm loving all the praise. I'm loving how much everybody is loving this. I'm feasting. I kind of feel like I can leave it at that, right? No, that's not me. So let's dive down layer by layer, floor by floor of the dungeon of Dungeon Meshi. Alright, level 0. Let's talk about the adaptation. So Trigger operates in a whole bunch of different modes across their series. You know, bombastic giga action on Kill la Kill, more kind of stylish, cool violence like Cyberpunk Edge Runners, hyper iconified sci-fi like Luluco, but then in the mode of almost Evangelion, this kind of slice of life minutia with a much more somber tone sci-fi like Gridman, hyper erratic cartoons like Panty and Stalking, but then that same kind of like cartoonish energy being dialed down to something so charming and pleasant like Little Witch Academia, and then whatever the hell Inferno Cop or Ninja Slayer from Animation, whatever those things are, they can even do that. And I don't think any other studio could do that. And yet all of them still feel like Trigger. They share like this very lively essence that flows through all of them. A willingness to let everything bend and exaggerate in response to the mood. An eagerness for any given scene to explode into Sakuga. A giddy feeling around great animation where they're kind of just showing off, but doing it sometimes in such sudden ways, such climactic ways, that it feels so awe-inspiring and engrossing, and not just sort of an exercise and formality and of demonstrating good animation, but really doing like crazy, novel, inventive things when the moment strikes them. But then on the other hand, a joy in scaling down, going so simple. You know, Trigger obviously famous for a lot of their like little 2-frame loops or extremely distorted, exaggerating character depictions. You know, the energy of the series gets balanced with this kind of strange, erratic minimalism at times. And Dunmeshi is just a smorgasbord of all of these modes and more. Vibrant, explosive kinetic action sequences, to goofy, cartoony, slice-of-life hijinks, to moments of detailed dungeon life that actually kind of evoke stuff like Gridman, where you're just kind of taking in the dungeon ambiance, whether that's lively crowds or the weird serenity of a long abandoned empty room. Constant shifting into this imagination space, like, that's good stuff, man. That's something I loved in the manga as well. That's something I just love in anime in general. That when Leos is talking about a monster, about its anatomy or about its habits, he's not just saying stuff. We're seeing stuff. We see into his brain. We see comical little diagrams of everything he's talking about. It's so, like, educational. Deep, subtle character acting and really heartstring tugging dramatic moments, you know? allowing themselves to take themselves seriously in those times and just convey grief or loss or relief or triumph. But most of all, the cooking, the eating, the food, some of the most sublime depictions of preparing and enjoying a meal I've seen in any anime. And yet, of course, it's not typical food. It's dungeon food. So let's talk about level 1 now. The food. The primary conceit of the series is taking traditional fantasy monsters, dragons, cockatrices, giant mushrooms, mer people, ghosts, goblins, a ghoul with no conscience, and eating them. You know it. My gluttonous ass is not surviving the dungeon. Or actually, I guess I am surviving the dungeon. Could have worded that joke differently, but you know what I'm saying. I'm a primarily food motivated person in life. Maybe most things I do revolve around food. And this is enough to get me interested. Way back when I first heard about the manga, I thought, that's a great premise, and I'm excited to see all the different dishes and stuff. But it really is such a brilliant premise, not just kind of on its own merit, but for making the world building so meaty. All the classic fantasy monsters and a lot of fun new ones have this additional layer of reality to them. We investigate, how do they live? How do their bodies work? How are they alike or different from real world animals? And then most importantly, how do they taste? It just really makes this feel like a living, breathing world full of creatures that actually persist and do things beyond their encounter with the heroes. It kind of asks that question. When you have a random encounter in a dungeon, what were those monsters doing before? What are they going to be doing after in the frying pan? Everything we expect to see becomes fresh and flavorful again through this questioning. Almost right away, your imagination starts getting sparked. You think about all these other traditional fantasy creatures, all these traditional dungeon enemies. How are they going to appear? What kind of qualities will they have? What kind of dishes can be made from them? And then we get a real empathetic spectrum of enthusiasm from total demented eagerness with Leos, and then a reasonable, healthy disgust and skepticism from Marcel. Marcel? For some reason, I totally forget how to pronounce her name. Marcel. But we focalize to them according to our palates, and we can change dish by dish. Sometimes it won't look very appetizing to us, and we can really relate to being grossed out by it, to needing to be convinced. Sometimes we're insatiable for it. We wish we could jump through the screen and chow down on whatever delectable dish they've cooked up. I'm much more on the latter category, of course. But, the episode with the treasure bugs. I don't want to eat treasure bugs. No, thank you. No, thank you. I have a whole thing with, coins. I don't like coins. I don't like things that look like coins. No. So you're brought into this real visceral experience of being these characters, of dungeon exploring, on a really sensory level. And they do a great job talking about the food, talking about how it tastes, how it feels in their mouth, what it reminds them of, in a way that can easily kind of relate and evoke experiences that you've had in your own life. Again, on the super visceral, super immediate sensory level. If they say, this tastes like a really well done, not well done as an overcooked, but well-prepared steak. And you picture yourself mowing down on a nice juicy steak. It's boom. You're right there in the dungeon with them. And as much as it plays with our expectations of monsters, it also does with food. Typically every dish they make out of monsters is in fact kind of like a monsterified recreation of a real-world human dish, taken from all sorts of different cultures all over the globe. And it's an opportunity to really celebrate those pleasures of all these different world cuisines. And why are they made? Why are they useful? How do they revitalize you? How do they provide for the body? How can they be made in different conditions? And why would people kind of turn to these cuisine techniques given their circumstances? The history of food is the history of humanity, you know? And I think it's one of the most compelling and deep and delicious ways to study any culture, any people. And the series, of course, you know, isn't talking about actual real world cultures. It's almost this sort of silly coincidence that they end up making famous dishes. But you gain that appreciation still. You gain an appreciation for that food. And then, of course, you know, you want to see how are they going to be monsterified? What monster creates a dish that's like this? It gives such a tangible and unique reward for us to track their journey with, you know? They're not just learning things, they're not just getting stronger, they're not just making progress on their overall quest, but as they encounter new monsters, as they encounter new environments, as they get more opportunities, the things that they cook and eat are again such visceral rewards that we're treated to that sensory experience of them enjoying and describing the food. And so you feel accomplished because of that. You feel truly rewarded for their progress. So let's talk about magic. So Meshi, I think, in many ways is the anti-isekai. Not just because it literally isn't an isekai and all of the characters are just adventuring in the world they were born in, but my biggest problem with isekai, or no, the biggest problem is probably like harem, or just like character writing in general, or a million other things. But one of my biggest problems, at least, is they keep trying to substitute mechanics for ideas. That rather than have an original thought about the setting or the character motivation or the plot line or anything like that, they instead kind of present the series based on the mechanics. Like it was actually a video game. Boring settings, cookie cutter characters, predictable plot, and the innovation, if you can call it innovation, comes from like how the magic system works. Or the secret abilities of the MC, or whatever, and bleh, nah, no good. And you're expected to care about this, and major plot points hinge around this. Oh my god, I need to get my speed stat higher. Oh man, that sword is so much more powerful than my current sword. My mana using abilities allow me to hide my amount of mana, and your mana detection abilities are giving you the wrong reading, so when you use your spell that compares mana to mana, my mana is actually secretly higher than your mana. It's like, I don't care, dog. Give me something with a little heart. Meshi basically has two mechanics, okay? One is magic. Magic exists, right? That's different than the real world. And how does magic work? Well, generally you chant something or you draw a magic circle and there's like mana. You have to have mana. But it just can kind of like do a bunch of stuff. It can kind of just do whatever you think it ought to be able to do. Like you can walk on water with magic. You can cast a big fireball. You know, just very traditional like TTRPG type spells. But the main thing is you just don't need to worry about it. You don't need to really concern yourself with the intricacies of how magic manifests in this world. It's consistent, and if you think about it, it is actually remarkably consistent in how it's depicted across the series and what it can and can't do. And you can kind of track Marcel's like MP levels that she has to refresh them and stuff, and then you can attribute that to spells you saw her cast. But it doesn't draw attention to its consistency. And it certainly doesn't suggest that you ought to care at all or make inferences based on the particulars. You know, like they introduce the idea of dark magic that is forbidden to study because it can have some pretty devastating consequences and stuff. And there's like some controversy around should dark magic be allowed to study, and Marcel has this kind of secret that she knows a lot about dark magic and blah blah blah. But they're not like dark magic always requires the dark sigil. Is that a dark sigil over there? Like, no. The part that you have to care about is that Marcel could get in trouble for using this. Right? Like, you don't need to concern yourself with these, like, arbitrary mechanical details that they throw in. What you need to concern yourself is with the characters and the plot and the events that are happening. So how does the dungeon work? Well, it's just an area where a lot of magic gets concentrated. And because of that, monsters start showing up. And that's it. The dungeon is not really special beyond that. The only other kind of mechanic around the dungeon is that there is somebody who is the dungeon master. But again, there isn't kind of some mechanic around that you're supposed to... who is the Elder Wand's master? Well, it all comes down to whether or not it transferred ownership when Harry disarmed frickin' Draco. No, nothing like that. No, it's not that stupid. I don't need to get into it because it happens in the manga later, but it's the important thing is that it's not stupid and it's very simple and you don't have to care about how it works. The other element, the other mechanic, you could say, is that there is a variety of sentient races. There's tall men, elves, dwarves, half-foots, kobolds, gnomes, orcs, ogres. I think that's all of them. Pretty sure that's all of them. And they all have some kind of traits and characteristics. Physically, for sure, they do. And then there's sort of like characteristics that within the series and then also based on your expectations around these archetypes outside of the series from like D&D or whatever, you have some kind of assumptions about them and that those are typically true, but not immutably, not transcendentally. You know, if we can get into this a lot. This is a hefty topic, a hefty can of worms, but basically when you're writing a fantasy series that has fantasy races in them, it's okay to say elves are an ancient wise race that specialize in magic and they're very attuned to magic. That's okay. But if you start writing like she could never do that because she was an elf and you just kind of present that uncritically and you have like major plot points hinge around just these like immutable, overpowering, overwhelming things that a certain race of peoples has to do, that's when it's like, A, this feels kind of racist, and B, that's just like lazy, stupid, uninteresting writing. And again, I mean, start harping on Harry Potter again here, but, you know, a lot of series have this problem. Like, imagine there was like an intelligent demon race and you were just like, and they have to be evil. The most important thing, even though they're as smart as people and can do everything people can and have like a language and some sort of civilization and relationships and socializing, the most important thing is that they always have to do evil. It's just like, that's lazy, man. Come on. All right. So let's talk about what this enables. This actual societal writing that has like a care and consideration for not just individuals, but the society that would form around them. This is where the complexities of this series emerge. And Dun Meshi is actually like a very complex storyline. There's a lot of things going on. It starts very simply as we're trudging down the dungeon to eat monsters. But more and more different plot elements emerge, different factions emerge, different kind of power struggles and very complicated situations emerge. But all of these result from social relationships. All of the intricacies of world building, the factions and power struggles, people's professions, the racial relations, the history that we learn on various scales about the history of this dungeon, the history of dungeons within the world, the history of race relations, the history of the individuals that we deal with. All of that stuff emerges not from just arbitrary rules and mechanics, just being told, well, that's the way it is, but as like reasonable societal consequences of these kind of small elements that have been established. So the way that the races are racist to each other. There's a lot of racism in this series. All of the characters have stereotypes and prejudices and to some extent grudges towards some of the other characters just because of their fantasy races. They're kind of founded. I don't mean that it's like correct for them to be racist by any stretch. And of course, much of the growth and character development in these series is for people to transcend these preconceived notions and to learn more about the individuals that they're with. But it's like, it makes sense that they think those things because of how these races would realistically see each other. So, for example, Chilcook is a half-foot. He's like kind of a hobbit equivalent. He's a little guy. And Senshi is a dwarf. And dwarfs cannot get over thinking of half-foots as children because they look like dwarves do when they're children. And dwarves have this kind of like preconceived understanding that half-foots must grow up at some point to look like dwarves. And eventually they'll grow a big bushy beard and get really burly too. And this is not founded in reality. It's just this sort of stereotype that dwarves have around halflings. And you're like, oh, yeah, I could see why, like, in dwarf culture, which probably doesn't interact with half-foot culture all that often, they end up kind of, like, thinking things like that. But it's really annoying to Chilcook, because Chilcook is, like, 35, and he has kids. And he's like, can you please stop treating me like a child? You know, it's like all these little interactions that start as incomplete, unfounded, stereotypical assumptions. I shouldn't say unfounded, though. Founded, again, societally. But then lead to growth and connection and a deeper understanding between individuals through individual connection and compassion and mutual understanding. There's a culture that springs up around the dungeon itself, both positive and negative, and this drives a lot of the plot threads and kind of provides a lot of the backstories for the characters. And again, this culture that springs up is just kind of like totally socially consequential from what the dungeon represents. Like, there's treasure down there, there's gold down there, it's dangerous, so the whole kind of system of partying up and mercenary people and the way they go down, the protocols they have, the agreements they have, the social contracts that form around it, it all makes sense. And it's just kind of like exciting to see it play out and to understand all these different aspects of it. But it's never just arbitrary. It's never just because I said so. It always is like, oh yeah, of course they would have to do something like that. So in general, it's just this mode of problems that are kind of born societally, like these sort of racial prejudices or just sort of systemic flaws that result in this very mercenary culture around dungeon exploring, but then get resolved on an interpersonal level between individuals who are becoming compassionate and becoming open-minded, which is like a pretty sweet way to write, you know, because at first you're fleshing out the world when you kind of come up with an idea for a conflict that inherently has world building within it, it has interesting ideas within it, while also reinforcing our characters' personalities and their ideals and their interests and how they deviate from societal expectations. And then it resolves in growth and the characters being more open-minded and this feeling of potential opening up for things to change on even the societal level. It works its way all the way back up to an actual major societal change. And I don't want to get too specific because I think most of the great examples I can think of are later in the series. But the revolutionary potential of this series, which I'm always talking about in these anime reviews, usually in the negative, as in, this series does not at all contain a revolutionary imagination. Here, it is well explored and celebrated, and it really feels like, at last. This also wins my It's Like One Piece award, where the lessons we learn on the personal level scale up, and the characters feel motivated to do something about it. to resolve these problems at the level that they started. And that's just great. That's just so inspiring and exciting, and again, just sort of brings the potential you created in this world building to bear and make it mean something. It's not just mechanics, it's not just set dressing. It's the root of both conflict and potential resolution. It's so good. But of course, we're talking about a framing of individuals that are within a society, that constitute a society, that bring to bear society, but are still individuals. And I think having this sort of framing, this sort of writing style, also really heightens our connection with our friends. We understand them not just as characters unto themselves, but as persons navigating a society that we are also coming to understand. We know what the societal expectations placed on them are. We know what prejudices exist around them. And that enables us to both anticipate their choices and actions going forward. They seem more reasonable, the things they do feel less arbitrary. We can kind of relate to them better, focalize through them better. But also enables the series to take real shortcuts in like backstory and characterization. I think often that just has so much like tedium accompanying that. But if you are able to say, well, I was a member of this like half-foot guild that was run by Chilcuck, just through kind of the societal framing and the societal build-up and world building you've done, you've already conveyed so much stuff with that. You've already kind of like set up your expectation for how this character's story has gone and is going to go. And that allows you to just focus in on the most like crucial moments, on the twists around that character, on the great moments of revelation and realization for that character. I think most of all though, and this is probably the biggest component to this series' mainstream success, is that this framing really highlights all the wonderful quirks of our main cast, of really every character in this series. Because there is a meaningful societal world, the way each character deviates from that societal world is also meaningful. It allows these quirks to manifest in inauthentic, non-cliche ways, where it's not just like autism 101 stuff that's like top 10 signs you might be autistic. Oh, you feel awkward talking to new people. Oh, you have time blindness. Oh, you obsess over little trinkets or whatever. You can really explore, a quirk that might be very relatable, like, I don't know, food sensitivity or sensory sensitivity, or having really intense special interests, or being really bad at reading people's emotions, or being kind of like naive or conversely overly cynical. All of these kind of like character traits that are kind of quirky get to be explored in this setting. You get to see them manifest in this setting, not just in their most kind of like stereotypical basic forms, but as something unique and lively that connects you even more to the world. Like, what is more exciting to say, oh, you have like special interests, and we're just saying this character has special interests and likes to ramble about them, or have it be plot relevant that Leos is super autistically interested in monsters and has like memorized the monster manual and can rattle off all these like stats and facts about them, and have that be like integrated into the plot and something kind of unique in the world that reflects how somebody with that type of autism would really grow up in that world. So yeah, I think, and this kind of cuts both ways too. Like, you can really dive into the ramifications of these personalities. There's a lot of social ramifications explored, especially with Leos, and whenever he has to converse with another human being. You get to really explore these things in depth in a way that's very empathetic and possibly relatable, without it just being real world things, without having the baggage of saying, oh, Leos is like failing interviews for his office job because he won't shut up about trains or whatever, right? Like, I think you get more freedom to explore these sorts of quirks, more playfulness, more empathy, really, if you don't have the baggage of it being something that somebody out there could actually take too personally. The end result is these characters are like really truly lovable. They're flawed, they're weird, they're obsessive, but I think they're pretty relatable. And you cheer for them. You're right there with them. You're in the dungeon with them and you want to see them succeed. It's clear that Kui-sensei shares this deep love and fascination for these characters. If you read the Tankobons, if you read her standalone art books, if you look at her Twitter pages, if you look at all the stuff that's in the Adventurer's Guide, there is so much love for these characters. I think just the way that she draws them in modern clothing all the time, or draws them doing like modern activities and thinks about how they would exist in the real world and what kind of relationships they have, and all the stat sheets she made where she lays out how much everybody likes everybody else. Like, she's thought about all this. She's obsessed with all this. Her love for these characters are so deep that she just wants to bring them to life in every way that she can. And I think this is where the true depth and quality of the series really, really comes alive, is just the depth with which these characters are written. And again, it's not belabored backstories for everyone that are so tragic and so involved. It's not just like mimetic quirkiness, but instead just like a deep sense that these characters really are brought to life, and we're just kind of along there with them. And then on the final level, it's food again. But really, like, it's really all about the food. The way the journey is measured by meals. Almost every chapter is named after the dish that they eat. The care and detail shown, and how Kui-sensei, and within the canon of the series, Senshi, track all of their ingredients. Like, again, it's extremely consistent without it being treated like a mechanic or being treated like what you ought to care about. But if you pay attention, everything they eat is sourceable. There is a provenance to every dish they make. They have this meal, and you can see in the background Senshi is packing up the leftovers. They pick up different herbs and spices and other resources and stuff like that, and you watch it appear in meals until it slowly runs out, and there's probably a passing comment by Senshi of, well, the flour we got from the orcs is finally all gone. And just that sort of consideration, just placing that much importance on food, it's like, I get you, homegirl. This is how I would write too. The way that all these societal problems often settle to this interpersonal communication over a shared meal, time and time again, and every time it moves me that they get so worked up about all these issues that have been basically passed on to them by society at large, and then they bond and they connect and they see each other as humans over a shared meal. Well, not necessarily humans, but you know what I mean. And then food becomes the springboard for a lot of the messages of the show. This very holistic environmentalist viewpoint, where they talk about the overall ecology of the dungeon, of the food chain, of resources, of how everything is able to stay alive. And it's absolutely based, And I wouldn't say I'm like a huge environmental activist. There's other types of activism that I would rank higher than that. But of course, I am very, very concerned about the environment of the Earth. I think anyone who isn't living under a rock would be. Things are terrible right now. We are doing heinous, depraved acts to our Mother Earth. So the series that champions selflessness, and sustainability and compassion to the things that you are enjoying, the riches that you are harvesting, it's just wonderful. The interconnectedness of all things, on the societal level, on the historic level, but then also on the environmental level, and then most relevantly on the food chain. As the series continues, I kind of started feeling like, man, surely they can't bring it back to food. Surely somehow this whole plot line can't be ultimately resolved by cooking and eating. Surely this must start to feel strained. But no, it truly is all about food. And it truly always works, at least for me, because food is really just that important to life. From this edible thesis, there's these deep meditations on death, on life, on what is our purpose on this earth, couched within the mechanics of their worlds, but deeply relevant, deeply resonant as well to our worlds, to the big existential questions that we have. And I feel, this series has brought me a lot of peace. That when I think about those big questions, some of the messages of this series come to mind in a way that I find very soothing and comforting, and it's a philosophy I truly love. So, unsurprisingly, this is a 10. And we got a little emotional there, feeling a lot of powerful ways about this type of series, feeling some type of way for sure about my beloved Dun Meshi. But we're just getting warmed up, because next we're talking about Hibike. After 9 years, it's the conclusion to Hibike. It's a long, winding history, First there was the original series and a little bonus OVA back in 2015, a second season in 2016, Liz and the Bluebird, which is a film that takes place in parallel to the second season, came out in 2018. Then a fully sequel movie, Our Promise Brand New Day, came out in 2019. The ensemble band OVA came out last year, which was really just the lead into the final finale, the final season 3 in 2024. A full 9 years after it began. It's about 3 years in the life of Kumiko, living, breathing, competitive band. The series has always been very important to me. We're going to talk at length about my personal relationship to it. I feel like I can't not. I think I just kind of need to bring that to bear and to kind of bear witness to myself working through all of the ways this series has impacted my life in service to this finale. And then we'll just use that as a jumping off point to talk at even greater length about why I think this series is so impactful to me. So buckle up. There's a lot of slides for this one. Okay. So season 1 came out at a point in my life when I was in a period of great flux. And partially due to that, and then just partially due to a million other things, it was also one of the peak periods of mania in my life. And I'll be referring, I think, quite often through these slides to being manic back then, and to having manic episodes, and to generally just sort of having this undercurrent of mania in my life. And I don't want to be over dramatic, and I don't want to cause people undue concern or anything. It's kind of strange for me to look back on now, because it's hard to really understand exactly how I was feeling or thinking back then. It all feels very distant now, which is great. So I don't want to present myself as, worse off than I was. But basically I was just a little out of touch with reality, I guess I would say. I was having a lot of very distorted thinking in terms of what things meant to me, and I don't know. I don't really need to belabor this point. It occurred to me now that saying that word, manic, mania, it's a pretty loaded word. It's a pretty medically significant word, and I don't want to conflate too many things altogether. But hopefully you kind of just understand where I was at. Like I said, I was in a period of great flux. I was finishing up undergrad, and I was just facing this massive decision paralysis about what I was going to do next. And when this series landed on me, it landed on me like a bomb. And I was generally just totally incapable of parsing the extremely strong, almost violently strong emotions that watching this generated in me. Specifically, I remember after I watched episode 8, which is Festival Triangle, where Kumiko and Reina climb up the mountain together and play during the festival. I took a long, long walk in a nearby park. A long walk. This was something I used to do a lot. I walked for probably 6 or 7 hours and just kind of cried the whole time. And I felt like I had not only not accomplished anything with my life or done anything to really make myself happy, but I truly felt that I was like infinitely far away from a feeling of satisfaction or a feeling of happiness. And of course, I took this not as a sign that I should transition, which at the time I really already knew deep down that I was trans, and I was just sort of not even in denial, but in denial that I should transition. I just thought that transitioning would be net worse for me than just going on in this horrible manic state. Or, you know, I could have seen this as, wow, I am resonating so deeply. I am so emotional about this. Maybe I should try to get into a relationship. Maybe that is something that I am actually screaming out for and I have a deep need for. No, I didn't come to either of those conclusions. I decided I needed to write more. And this led to, again, pretty manically writing out a 30,000 word, that's not an exaggeration, blog post about this episode. Oops, what a goof. So if you want, you can find that on my blog. There is nothing like coldwater, blogspot.com, if you are so inclined. I think there's some interesting stuff in there. I don't know. I remember it wasn't anywhere near as long as it was supposed to be. It ended up being like just kind of like rushed and whirlwinded, and I still had a lot more to say. So my goal was probably like 100,000 words or something ludicrous. So, I copied over this slide. I copied over and then I added this. So what I was really obsessed with at this time was the Kumiko Reina relationship. That was peak Yuri interest. We'll get into more of this later, but just the way that it sort of blossomed within the show was so captivating to me. I had this weird, again, pretty manic obsession with not letting the Yuri factor of this episode be ruined. I didn't want anything else to kind of like dismiss it or downplay it or run contrary to it. So I actually refused to watch episode 9 and onward until season 2 was like really imminent, and I realized I was like missing out on a lot. I went back and watched the rest of season 1. I used all sorts of crazy analysis and deduction. This is a big, substantial part of this blog post to prove that Kumire was real. It was actually very embarrassing, I asked Kumiko's VA at Anime North, and she was like, I don't think so. They're just friends. Don't ask me questions like this. They had like a panel interview thing. I basically became like one of those Sherlock Watson shippers for the BBC Sherlock Holmes series. I've only learned about this in like YouTube videos. Like Sarah Zed had made a bunch of YouTube videos about this, and that's where I learned about how insane that shipping culture got. But look into it; it's kind of interesting. Look into like W theory. That's the level I was operating on, trying to make Kumire real. Fortunately, that was like peak Hibike mania. That was also, as I said, peak mania in my life in general. But the series kept reverberating with me as my life continued to change. I rewatched almost all of it, plus my first viewing of Liz and the Bluebird with a guy that I had a pretty big crush on at the time. I think, like, I confessed to him at some point, not mutual, whatever. I'm pretty sure I did that after we watched an episode together. Because it was like, the mood is right. We're watching Hibike. We also went to go see the movie together, Our Promise, Brand New Day, which was also one day after the Kyoani arson attack. Like, we woke up to news of that. It was kind of wild. Like, it just felt really unreal. Just that confluence of stuff. And these are all very precious memories to me. They're bittersweet memories for sure, but with this much time since then, uh, kind of, we'll get into this kind of feeling later, but after a certain point, it's like whether a memory is like happy or sad or both or just meaningful, the important thing is that it was impactful and meaningful and mattered to you a lot in the time, and then it just sort of becomes this very kind of beautiful element in your history. Also, sorry if the person I'm referring to here is watching this. I don't know. Does he watch these? I think a couple times he has. Well, sorry if that's embarrassing, but it was a while ago. I think it's okay. At any rate, all of this is to say that this series is like very, very important to me. Definitely like top 5 all-time anime. Liz is definitely my number 1 favorite anime movie, and I think it might actually just be my favorite movie, period. But in the long gap after season 2, I kind of stopped thinking about Hibike very often. My obsession with anime in general, I mean, this sounds absurd to say 2 hours into an anime review video, but my obsession with anime really has diminished quite a bit. My obsession with Yuri is a lot lower, and then just this intense kind of manic feeling of obsession in general has really waned over the years. And, that's because I got an actual life now. Like, it was by no means a smooth or easy road, but I actually became like mentally healthy. I transitioned. I started a career that I enjoy to a reasonable extent. I got into a relationship that makes me just overjoyed every single day that I get to be with someone I love this much who loves me back. I built a lifestyle where I felt happy and sane after a lot of failed attempts, after a lot of false starts and a lot of stumbling and a lot of searching. I'm like doing pretty good now. I'm really, really happy to say that. When the OVA came out, I didn't even realize for weeks. I was so kind of tuned out of Hibike news. I was kind of surprised. Like, I knew it was coming. It had been announced a while ago, and I remember it being announced. But even more, that kind of speaks to like, wow, it just fell off the map for me. So I actually kind of felt worried going into season 3. Like, if I wasn't so obsessed, if I didn't have these nearly almost supernatural seeming associations where it felt like some of the most impactful, important moments of my life are kind of, soundtracked by watching Hibike in parallel, would it still hit? Would it still feel so important, so gripping? Could it still kind of take over my life as it had before? Would I even want it to? But the answer is yes. This season had me sobbing with tears, heart throbbing, clenching plushies. I got so many plushies back there. Hoping, yearning, screaming with joy, literally writhing with happiness, literally pumping my fist in the air. I was also kind of worried. Like, I felt bad. Like I said before, we had the anime club shows, and I prioritized getting caught up on those so I could watch the ending with anime club, which was great and a lot of fun, and I don't regret that. But I felt really bad that I had left, 2 of the most important shows to me of the season to the very end, to just kind of be like unceremoniously marathoned through at the very first opportunity I got so I could make this video. And I felt like, man, my priorities are so whack because this is a series that is so important to me and has been so precious to me, and I'm treating it kind of like an afterthought, and I'm not spacing it out. I'm not leaving it for like the ideal conditions, and it's just so I can make like a video. Like, what is the video so important? At any rate, I was kind of worried, like, am I doing it a disservice? But I don't know. I think it's almost better this way. I got so caught up into it. I could watch it for like an hour at a time and just feel so immersed in that world. And I think the alternative, where I was keeping up with it and watching week by week, some of the gaps between episodes, I might have actually just completely gone insane. But really, though, the power the series had over me and how emotional I felt about it now, it wasn't that it's no different than back then. It's not that, oh, I am the same person as I was 9 years ago or 8 years ago or whatever. No, no, definitely not. And it's like, yeah, I mean, I wrote a lot for these slides. I ended up writing a lot for these slides, but not 30,000 words. 30,000 words is so goddamn much. I'm not going off the deep end on this. Like, yeah, I'm recording a very long video, but that's what I just do all the time. That's just my hobby. That's just what I like doing. I realized that my obsession with it back then wasn't totally circumstantial either. It was the show being so good that really enabled me to behave that way, that made me want to act that way, for better or worse. That's what I really realized. Oh, I duplicated this slide too. Anyways. Okay, so that's my whole personal history. Moving that aside, why is it so good? Why does it hit the way it does for me? First thing you can just easily point to is the production. It isn't KyoAni's most experimental or flashy production by any stretch, you know, compared to things like Nichijou or Dragon Maid. It's very, very cinematic and dramatic. It has tons of really rich, subtle, beautiful character acting, moments of very powerful sakuga. But I wouldn't say it's like their high watermark on those categories either. Probably Violet Evergarden, if you're just looking for something that's purely in that mode, is like the apex there. But there's a unique quality in this series. I think that's basically shared between it and K-On! Is the other one that I think really grasps this sort of production idea. And it's been refined in this season to an even more sublime level. Basically, what we're trying to do here is capture the overwhelming splendor of human emotion. The consistency of the animation style, the accuracy, the realism, this inventive, bold, correct but not flashy directorial style and shot composition. All of this combined, first off, leaving aside animation style, I guess, is like a kind of cinematic mode I associate with a lot of modern Japanese cinema I really like. Most notably the films of Ryusuke Hamaguchi. That's just an aside. Yeah, I think it's like kind of interesting that these movements are sort of coinciding and appearing both in this anime and then some of their cinematic stuff, but we can't get too derailed. We still got a lot of slides to go. The result of this is that it almost feels detached. And you might think, how the hell is something that feels detached going to capture the overwhelming splendor of human emotion? But let me cook. Like, you're not wholly in Kumiko's emotional viewpoint. You're often very close. You're definitely encouraged to kind of like focalize through her. A lot of shots actually are from her POV. But you still kind of feel like you're a step back from it. That you're still an observer rather than being her or being anyone else or like being inside. So this creates a sort of detailed distance where you're seeing everything at once with this kind of vivid, full beauty and splendor, which in turn creates this feeling of consistency across the wildly varying emotional spaces. That in moments of anguish, in moments of triumph, in moments of calmness, in moments of joy, there's still kind of this overarching consistency in how things are depicted and how shots are structured. So what this creates is this feeling of, no matter if these are happy moments, sad moments, moments of earned triumph, of bitter disappointment, of longing and loss, or tearful reconciliation, These are all beautiful moments. These are all very precious memories of a fleeting stage of your life. This is not only, a consistent message of the series and how characters kind of view this time in their life and the importance of what they're doing, but it's also reflected in the production. That no matter what is being shown, it's being bathed in the same beautiful light, this beautiful representation. And that precious should be what is most immediate, most visceral in what you see. And this is what I'm talking about, the warmth of this series, the use of like bokeh, the detailedness of it, the warm color scheme in most situations. All of these things can vary, all of these elements can kind of come and go, but there's this like consistent undercurrent of preciousness in what you see. But although this distance, nostalgic perspective bathes every shot, every scenery, every background, every character, it's the immediacy of everything, of every single point of drama, that really grasps you in the heart. The preciousness of the time is subtly insisted upon by the production at every moment, It's not enough that the characters say, we only get 3 shots of this through our entire high school career. This is the last time we're doing this in our entire high school career. Who knows what kind of relationship we're going to have after high school? All of these kind of like recurring suggestions of this fleetingness, this preciousness. The production is also insisting upon it. It's constantly putting you in that mood. So you care. You care so much about everything that happens or may happen. Every conflict, every conversation, every performance especially, it all feels as critical as it would be for the characters. But right when the dramatic intensity would be like too much, when that would be too overwhelming, when you feel like you're going to just have a heart attack because you care so much about the precious high school memories of these girls and hope that things don't get ruined, suddenly the production kind of reminds you of that distance and sweeps you away. It reminds you of this grander and wiser perspective. And this is expressed through moments where suddenly we're so far away from the characters, Sweeping shots of just beautiful scenery in kind of stillness, maybe just hearing the distant music of their rehearsal, the detailed still life of these minutiae, seeing tiny little slivers of scenes around the band room or around the parks around the school or in someone's room in their home life. Just kind of this feeling of transcendence, of things going on that are above and beyond all of these conflicts, above and beyond the band's success or failures. Even tiny little candid capture of human moments, which again you would think are kind of intimate and drawn into the conflict, but just sort of remind you that these are people that are going to keep going on living after this, that this will just kind of be a little slice in their life, and we can't even speak to how consequential or not it will be. You're suddenly both wrapped up in the moment and simultaneously nostalgic for it, caring because it matters so much right now, but also feeling sentimental for a time in your life where things mattered that much. It's like a weird trick. I feel, typically to kind of pull this off, you need something like a narrator that is talking about the events of the series like years later, like Tatami Galaxy, a lot of other examples like that, or being told a story that you're being given as nostalgia that's set decades in the past and kind of laments a lost era or something like that. This series manages to achieve it, I think, solely through this combination of the detached production and the immediacy of the emotions in the plot. I don't know if this is making a lot of sense. I sure hope it is, because it feels very important to me to why this series is so good. I think this is like a real key component in how it all works. And I really hope I'm articulating it somewhat compellingly, at least, even if maybe you don't exactly get what I mean. the feelings then emerge above all of this drama, above all of this conflict of catharsis and of achievement and of self-actualization. And that's what brings this warmth, this golden light. This time more than ever, I watched this and I felt like, wow, I became a good adult. I did it. I don't know why this series just kind of had me reflecting on it. And I talked about it before, but like I'm doing good now. But at the same time, I can remember quite fondly when everything felt like this. And it's not just high school. Actually, through high school, I was like pretty just emotionally checked out for most things. um, but a lot of times in undergrad, times like I talked about before, where I felt very manic, or I had unrequited feelings for someone, or things just felt too big and too significant, and I felt paralyzed by the weight of trying to figure out what I would do with my life. Everything felt like that back then. And now I can kind of look at those days with fondness for my past self. And for 22 minutes, everything feels like that again. Both those things simultaneously, this blend. And I can appreciate that. I feel like I have the distance to appreciate that. That was just one of like 5 subjects. Now let's talk about these dramatic plot lines that I keep alluding to. How do they work? Why do I think they're so good? I think this is actually a pretty good contrast with YuruCamp in that nothing in the series emerges from some like horrible coincidental revelation where you just somehow randomly find out somebody did something horrible, or conversely some horrible coincidence of obscuration where you act totally ignorantly because you just happen to not find something out, or someone just acting totally erratically all of a sudden, or wholly disregarding somebody else's feelings. None of that is ever the instigating factor. Everything is wholly motivated by long established character traits, and is often kind of foreshadowed due to these traits. Like, you see arcs away how somebody's personality is eventually going to clash with somebody else's when that kind of boils to the surface. And when things boil up to the surface, it's because, despite being considerate of one another, despite being generally reasonable people with reasonable goals, there's just some fundamental difference in opinion that has now become pressingly relevant. And that's real. That just is how it is sometimes. People just sometimes end up on opposite sides of an issue, and no matter how much they try to avoid it, those trains end up colliding. This is, I think, the best sort of drama. This is as far as you can get from forced. It respects the characters so much. It gives them impactful, series-long opportunities to grow and change as the result of these conflicts. You feel genuinely unsure how it's going to work out. Sometimes you feel like, I don't even know if this can work out. The series has space for things to just go unresolved, for people's problems to not get solved. And you feel so uncertain, and you feel, so compelled to kind of see how this is going to work out, because it wasn't caused by some stupid misunderstanding or miscommunication. It wasn't caused just because somebody misinterpreted what somebody said. And so it can't be solved so simply either. It's not just going to be settled in someone going, no, I didn't mean that. Oh, really? Oh, shoot. I thought you did. Shake my hand. No, you need to delve deep into people's personalities. Why do they want the things they want? Why do they have the opinions they have? To find common ground, to find a way to move through it. So not to be too reductive, but Hibike is basically just a long chain of such incidents. Normally over the arc of an entire season or the entire series, these incidents keep escalating in intimacy and relevance to Kumiko, and she feels a greater and greater responsibility to do something, to actively participate in them, and to try to resolve them. They also escalate on potential impact on the band itself, that suddenly the success of the band starts feeling jeopardized by these conflicts. And they're all, tied together thematically with some sort of lesson that carries on from arc to arc, that, the way one problem was resolved, Kumiko remembers and kind of tries to apply going forward. and also tied together through the many forms of relationship that people have within this band. You know, they're rivals because they play the same instrument. Maybe they're rivals within the band, but they're friends outside of band. Maybe they're enemies outside of band because of any number of things. How does that manifest within the band when they're trying to rehearse together as a team? You know, there's an infinite number of potential connections people can have. On the one hand, if you want to be kind of reductive, it's sort of like people have their arc and then shuffle aside, their problems sort of taken care of. It's never just so formulaic that you're just like, oh, well, we'll be like done with this character in a bit. You're never really sure how things will end up. You'll never really sure if this is just the start of that character being kind of escalated into a major plot focus forever, or if, you know, we kind of learn their lesson and see how their arc resolves, and then they just kind of become a good member of the band indefinitely. But I think because they have this sort of recurring arc structure where we move conflict by conflict, character by character, there is a promise of some sort of resolution. There is a sense that people's problems are going to be genuinely meaningfully solved. And I think that creates like just a nice spirit of optimistic and hopeful engagement with the series. I think it would be so much more miserable if everybody's problems just indefinitely marinated and it's just like this constant stacking up of issues in every direction. But instead, these resolutions are meaningful and so much really changes in response to them. The relationship of these people has grown, their perspectives have broadened, everything is colored by it afterwards. And, you know, when they're kind of brought back to being minor characters again, these past conflicts are still constantly thematically evoked, especially in this season with, you know, all the previous seasons and movies brought to bear on it. They're able to use previous conflicts as this sort of emotional shorthand, where Kumiko just kind of briefly remembering a flash of it conveys so much about how she sees like the current situation. The resolutions are so powerful too. So many beautiful, moving scenes. The problems that it gets solved through radical honesty, through selflessness, and then sometimes selfishness. Sometimes it's selfishness that's necessary. Often through conceptualizing kind of a higher self-image, a higher achievement, something that's more important than what you feel in conflict about, that allows them to elevate themselves above this mindset of conflict that I just find so inspiring and so beautiful. Okay, so that's kind of like our dramatic foundation. That's just how they write these dramatic conflicts in general. And then on top of those, I'd say there's like two main spicy ingredients that are very unique to the series and I think are what make it so special on top of just being a very well-written drama. First is the band itself. So this isn't just people interacting in a void. They're not just random high schoolers. They're all bound up in playing in this very competitive concert band. And this motivates like a lot of conflicts and plot lines, as you would expect. And most of the subjects that kind of emerge from this are the ones you would probably expect, you know. Who gets what part? Can you hack it? Can you keep up with this level of competition? How do you improve? How do you break through? How do you capture these things? Blah, 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 blah. But what's more interesting to me isn't just kind of this like theming, but the way that it introduces this sort of social absolute. This is going to be like one of the most autistic things I've ever said. And to be clear, I don't actually do this. But in the past, I had conceived of making choices in social situations algebraically, okay? Where you have variables of what each person wants to do are on different sides of the inequality, and then you evaluate each side. I didn't even put this in the slides. I wasn't prepared to talk about this, but here we go. on each side of the inequality, you think about each person on that side, how much they want to do the option they're choosing, how much you care about making them happy, and then you evaluate that for each person, and then you figure out which side should be your choice based on that. And I often thought one of the feelings I had when I had like a big crush on somebody is that the variable of how much do I care about them being happy got cranked up to like infinity. And it was kind of a liberating feeling, because what normally was like a very nuanced, complicated thing to figure out, and these are all just stupid social situations like what restaurant we should eat at, now always had an obvious answer, which is, oh, well, the person I have a crush on wants to do X, so I also want to do X. And this sort of social dynamic exists in Hibike, that there is a variable that has a value of like infinity, which is the success of the band. No matter what anyone's opinion is, how anyone feels, the true thing you're trying to solve for, so to speak, the side that you want to see succeed, is the side that sees success for the band. That is priority number one. And you can say that's kind of unrealistic. Like, no matter how competitive these high schoolers are, would they really be capable of truly feeling like that? I don't know. And debatably, that's very unhealthy. And, you know, that's an actual root of a lot of conflicts in the show. Whether or not this should be how people act is a recurring theme. That's the root of many conflicts in and of itself, all throughout the series. But even in those cases, the people that take the stance that the band is paramount is still treated as valid. Like, that is still a absolute within these social interactions that you can cite, well, what's right for the band is XYZ, and that has inherently a whole lot of weight and validity, even if you personally are saying, I don't care what's right for the band, I want to do Z, right? So I think that's very interesting. It forms this rigid structure upon which of the rest of the dramatic plot lines weave themselves around, that always comes back to the success of the band. So I think that's very interesting, very refreshing. I think in doing this, you arrive at the innermost heart of competition in a pretty compelling and unique way that very few other series do. This truly transcendental factor of wanting to win, which usually articulates itself in like, I'm going to try so damn hard, I'm going to play through the pain, I want to win because my dying friend told me to win. Those kind of like cliche type things that don't really address, well, what is this feeling of wanting to win? But here, the feeling of wanting to win is being like shoved into, as I said, these very complicated social equations. And in doing so, you really get like the texture of it. You really get to see how it drives people and how it like twists opinions around this overwhelming transcendental factor. And it makes the interpersonal conflict more interesting, because it's not just about who's right or who's wrong, but it's even more about, even in situations, again, where they're trying to say, and I don't even care about this, it is still about, in many ways, what's right for the band, which often becomes a much more interesting question to evaluate. And of course, this extreme importance of the band across pretty much every single dramatic plotline is part of what makes the performance scene so amazing, so riveting, so cathartic, so hypnotizing. It's so full of little details. You're so activated watching them, you know? Trying to kind of judge every single little element of the performance, seeing how minor plot lines around, oh, this person needs to perform at this part and improve at it and nail it, and then, oh my god, you can hear it. They nail it. Bringing everything to bear, every conflict, every ambition, every achievement, presented in this kaleidoscope of immaculate instrument playing sakuga, determined character acting, evoked memories flashing into view. Some of the most beautiful scenes in the whole series are Kumiko suddenly being reminded of something by the music, by the performance. Some of my favorite individual shots, individual frames, are when you can see their scores covered in notes, reminders, encouragements, photographs, anything that will inspire them, that will bring out the best performance. The music's great too, of course. Like, could have had multiple slides around the original compositions that they created for the show and all of the musical meaning that you can infer from them, but I don't know, that could be a whole video in and of itself. Really, these performances are some of my favorite sequences in all of anime. To be honest, I wish there was even more this season. Like, okay, yeah, I can get you gotta save these things for maximum impact, but they're just like so good. I wish there was just hours of footage of KyoAni animating orchestral bands. Um, Another brief personal aside, just kind of speaking about concert band and stuff. So I played in a competition band in high school. We went to local competitions with other high schools, and we did well. Not as well as Kidoji. We would, I think, typically get like second or third out of maybe 10 people competing in like our regionals equivalent. And I don't even think there was like a nationals equivalent where we weren't aware of it at any rate. We never got to go compete at another level. Maybe there was something like that. I just personally didn't know about it. Cuz like I tried hard, you know. I tried to give the best performance I could, but not like really that hard. I can only maybe remember like twice in my entire 4 years at high school that I played like outside of class and outside of practice, that I actually voluntarily did additional practice. And I sort of cared about the results and stuff. Like, it felt good that we did well. But not that much. I really didn't have ambitions of, like, we're going all the way, and I'm going to be a big part of that. I just played second trombone, which typically is not a very difficult part. And I played my parts sufficiently well that I didn't get in trouble. Later in my life, I joined much more serious business choirs. I currently sporadically sing with a church choir that's like mostly made up of professional singers. So they're really try hard. And in these choirs, I had to try a lot harder and care a lot more. But these were lacking the element of competition. Nobody was grading us. We weren't beating anybody. It wasn't versus anyone. We just did performances. And of course, yeah, I put my whole soul into the performances, but a little different as well. And then throughout my entire life, and you know, in the present as well, I compete in various video games and go to tournaments and stuff. But again, I don't know. I don't really care if I win or lose in them. I say that, but if I have like a bad loss and I lose to somebody I shouldn't, I do feel terrible. And if I get a big win, yeah, I feel pretty great. But like, I'm not grinding. I don't have aspirations to be like amazing. I don't really want to win the tournament. It's kind of exhausting. Like, I've won tournaments in the past when I played in less competitive scenes. It's like, damn, you gotta play so much. So I'm pretty content, you know. I'm just there for a good time. I just like playing the game. So watching this show, I understand the culture of competition. Like, I've been around it. I know people like that. I've been in scenes like that. But it's also kind of foreign. Like, once again, I am just on the outsides of it. I've never once wanted to win as badly as these guys do. Not even close. But when I'm watching this, I don't really feel like, oh, I missed out. Like, oh, this is something I didn't take the chance to do. This is a feeling I have failed to have. Instead, it's more like watching this and feeling so caught up in it and feeling so personally invested. I feel like I've avoided missing out. Like, this series has allowed me to not miss out and to truly experience the highs and lows of competition through watching this. Which maybe sounds insane, but that's the feeling I get, and it's a great feeling. So let's talk about the second. I'm losing my mind. 2 hours 43 minutes. Oh my god. The second spicy ingredient that makes Hibike so cool, which is Kumiko's growing and emerging sense of self. And I would call this sort of like a meta sociological evolution, where the whole series kicks off with her making this callous comment to Reina that she pretty much immediately regrets, where Reina is bawling her eyes out because they didn't win their middle school competition, and Kumiko says, "Do you really think we were gonna win?" But in the vacuum of that regret, in the feeling that she should have said something different, there's just a big pile of questions with no answers yet. What should I have said? Should I have been honest like I was or not? But if I'm to be honest, well, like, what do I honestly believe? Was that what I honestly believed, or was that kind of like a callous shield I built up around myself? What are my real feelings? In every arc, Kumiko is given models on how to answer these questions. She sees people put in, not, the same situation, but situations where they have to kind of navigate a social situation, and Kumiko kind of sees how they answer that type of question. So do you put on a front of cheerful capability, like Asuka Senpai? Do you let your anxiety spill out and hope for help, like former President Senpai, sort of? Do you rely on this sort of overwhelming ideal of meritocracy? Do you push solely for your own needs? Etc., 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 etc. Every single character in the series represents some sort of answer to these questions. Sometimes Kumiko observes these models incidentally and kind of learns from them. But other times, people really deliberately push these social models onto her. People recognize that she's putting on a front, that she is trying to behave in some way that she thinks is useful and not just kind of being her honest, true self. But they each believe that they alone realize what she is masking, what actually lies underneath. I think the most interesting example, and definitely the most kind of obvious example, is Kanade-chan, who I would describe as like a sociopath. And I'm not using the medical definition of sociopath. I am not calling her an actual sociopath. But if you want to dive into a really deep rabbit hole of kind of sociological relationships, there's this concept of the Peter principle, and there's a term of sociopath within the Peter principle. And basically, the Peter principle is kind of stating there's always like a social game that's being played among people where you are sort of leveraging different things to gain an advantage. And that sociopaths in the Peter principle are those that are aware of this game and are like deliberately playing it and playing to win, as opposed to people that are totally ignorant of the fact that there is a game being played, and those that are aware of a game being played but are content to lose at the game. At any rate, Kanade-chan is definitely someone who is playing and playing to win, and is always needling Kumiko to kind of admit that she's also playing the game. There's so many scenes where Kumiko does something to try to resolve a conflict, makes some sort of remark or advice or something, and Kanade-chan goes, "Oh, you said that so that so-and-so will think this, and then that so-and-so will also do that, and then this person won't be mad at that person." And she's trying to make Kumiko admit that she's also playing this game, and then Kumiko goes, No, it's just what I thought. It's a really, really, really interesting dynamic, and I really enjoyed seeing how that played out. Just this weird combination of like sincere duplicity that Kanade-chan has. Also in this season, Mayu-chan I thought was very interesting. She just sort of engages Kumiko in this kind of subliminal, unspoken, implied language. Her own desires she can't really bring herself to articulate. Her anxieties just sort of overflow, and she hopes that somehow they will resonate with what she thinks she senses in Kumiko. And it's just this really kind of powerful study on Kumiko and how she's grown, that Mayu essentially kind of sees herself mirrored in Kumiko, but in a way that Kumiko can no longer kind of recognize. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. But really, those are two examples, but it's like every character in the series to varying extents has expectations on how she ought to behave, what side she ought to take in various conflicts. And she in turn grows and changes a little bit in response to those expectations, opening herself up to all sorts of experiences, let's try being friends. Let's try dating in part of the movie that happened. Let's try taking on this role or that role, a social role or a formal role within the band or whatever that is. But also defining herself in each case further using contrast. She realizes that, after all, she isn't quite like that. She's still another thing. She's still yet another thing. She's still something that hasn't quite been pinned down. It reminds me a lot of the Yuri series Bloom Into You. This had a very similar sort of theming. Especially, they make this theme super explicit in this play within a play that they put on near the end, where basically a woman has amnesia and is approached by three different women that knew her in the past, and each of them has drastically different claims as to what kind of person she was before the amnesia. She just has to like navigate that and stuff. Kind of reminds me of that. I don't think this is a coincidence. Neo Sensei said she was a huge fan of Hibike as a Yuri series. I don't know how she thinks of it in general now, but she called it a Yuri series. She called out episode 8. At the time, that was just another point of evidence in my insane Kumire delusions. Also, Neo Sensei, this is fun trivia, she played bass in high school concert band, so she probably like loves Hibike. That is a series that speaks directly to her soul. But just like Bloom Into You, it isn't that all of these different potentials, all of these expectations and models are created equal, and that Kumiko has to kind of find some transcendental other solution. You know, sort of like the absolute of band within these social equations, there's also a relationship in Kumiko's life that is an absolute, that trumps all of the others. One that represents both the biggest expectations for her, the biggest influence on how she thinks and acts and behaves, but also the one area where Kumiko is fully honest, where she finally kind of lets her guard down, where she doesn't act in response to all of these myriad expectations, where she doesn't try to weigh all of the different variables in this gigantic social equation, but just truly speaks as herself. And that, of course, is her relationship with Reina. So it's time to talk about this at last. And this is truly at last. There's not much more after this. We're getting there. We're getting there. As I said, my early obsession with this series is largely around the relationship between Kumiko and Reina. And that's just because my Yuri fanaticism in general was huge back then. My Yuri goggles was strapped on tight. In any series I watched, any girls that said a word to each other, I was shipping from day one. And of course, on top of that, I was reading basically everything that was released on Dynasty Scans every single day. You know, the typical egg stuff. The sort of thing that trans girls do when they are in deep distress. And then to see my delusions suddenly come to fruition 100 times more than I ever could have hoped in episode 8. As I went into in depth before, I just could not handle it. So, as compelling as the band's competitions were, even past this point of like peak mania, I always felt myself even more engrossed in this kind of secret plot line of Kumiko and Reina's relationship and how that grows and changes. It's a roller coaster with many, many highs. Remember the scene where they watch fireworks together? And then also a few really dismal lows, like Kumiko dating a man for a while. I mean, I should probably watch it again. I think probably it's well written and interesting. I was just so mad that it might be messing with the beautiful, wonderful relationship between Kumiko and Reina that I was like disgusted, revolted. And I really felt uncertain, far more uncertain than I did with like the band competitions. Where is this going to go? How far would they go with this? How explicit, how intimate, how meaningful, how deep? How often are we going to see these moments between them? How charged are they going to get? How fast is this going to move? And when will it suddenly, spontaneously emerge from any given episode, any given plotline? You know, in the end, whether or not I'd end up disappointed or elated beyond my wildest dreams, it truly felt like anything was on the table. Now I am much saner. Again, this is like, I like Yuri, obviously, but nowhere near as obsessively. Back then, I couldn't even read a hetero series. I would get like mad about any hetero relationship series. Now I read tons of those. They're great. Love is love. I'm in a hetero relationship. It's great. I love my boyfriend. It's awesome. But yeah, it's nowhere near as obsessive. Like I said before, Whisper Me a Love Song is just a full-on Yuri series. It's a Yuri manga adaptation. I didn't even watch it. But I realized as I was watching this Kumiko relationship was still super, super, super compelling to me. The season gave us so much between them, so many intimate moments, so many explicit declarations of love and importance and of specialness, so many promises and commitments, so many heartwarming moments, so many silly moments. They deliberately recalled and evoked some of the really iconic Kumire moments through all the seasons for this gigantic grand finale to their love. And when there was conflict between them, oh my god, I felt like my heart stopped. I did cry, but I wanted to like cry parentheses bad. And again, it's like, man, if I was watching this week by week, I don't know if I could have handled that. It's not even that I thought, oh my god, is the series going to end with them fighting? Obviously not. Obviously they were going to make up. But just the time between them fighting and them making up was like too painful. And I don't know. Maybe this ending, if I sent it back in time to myself, to my full-on Yuri goggles era, I would be disappointed. Because this is spoilers, I guess. But I'm sure if it was in this case, you would have heard. Does it ever get super explicit? Does anyone actually say, I am a lesbian and I have romantic attraction to you? Do they kiss? No. I don't think I ever really believed that that was going to happen. Even in my wildest delusions, even as much as I tried to convince myself that that was possible, I don't think I ever thought that they were just going to make out. Would it have been brave and based and powerful and memorable if KyoAni actually went for it? Well, sure. And again, the reason that they didn't might just be because they're cowardly. And as I talked about at length in Jellyfish Can't Swim at Night, anime is still a pretty cowardly industry. We cannot say if they were stopped by this cowardice. But at the same time, I really am truly satisfied with how this plotline resolved, with how this relationship was depicted across this final season. I really, really am. It's not just cope. It's not just, my expectations have lowered or whatever. I just think that they made their relationship, whatever it is, whatever words you want to use to describe it. I was just casually calling them girlfriends. Like when my boyfriend was over, I was like, well, that's her girlfriend and blah, blah, blah. And he never questioned that once because that's just how it's presented. But obviously they didn't say that in the show. I just don't think it matters what labels you put on it, whether you define it as romantic or not, whether you define it as sexual or not. Whatever it is so special and so meaningful, and it felt so complete over the arc of the series. So what makes the relationship so special? It's the specialness of it. Wow. I'm really losing my mind after talking about anime for 3 hours straight. No, it sounds insane, but I don't think there's any better way to put it. Because it's the contrast between the way they interact with each other and just every other interaction they have with everyone else in the series. The way that specialness unfolds is what gives this such an enchanting and precious quality. So we've already covered that Kumiko is really only honest around Reina. That everywhere else she's always kind of putting on at least a little bit of a front. She's always being proactively considerate of everybody and trying to juggle all these different conflicting ideals and stuff. But with Reina, it comes through in everything from the type of dialogue she has, the way she talks, the things she says, her body language, the very tone of her voice just loosens up and relaxes around Reina. And likewise, Reina reveals an entire other side to Kumiko. One of vulnerability, one of neediness. This feeling of a disrobing intimacy of the masks and performances of the day falling aside as you can find and take comfort in a partner. The warmth of that intimacy, I think, really, really deeply shines through. And whether that inspires you to reminisce about a current relationship you have like that, as I do when I watch this now, and it makes me really happy to think about how, I don't think I'm anywhere near as performative as Kumiko, and as I said, proactively considerate. But I do feel like around him I can relax to a greater degree, and I feel like he shows me a side of himself that I don't see when he's with anyone else. So lovely. Or, as it has in the past, it inspired this deep, implacable longing within me. It's either way, it's a powerful series, a powerful, powerful feeling. I don't know. I don't want to get into all of this, but I genuinely feel so compelled now to say there is love out there for all of us. I truly believe it. I used to be so in the pit. I had like five five unreciprocated like crushes on people in a row that just like were met with not being reciprocated, and I just felt like so cursed. But I don't know, and I'm not saying it's like a typical relationship necessarily. I'm not saying it's going to play out like you've seen on TV. It didn't really for me, but there's somebody that will make you have these feelings. I promise. There's somebody that you will meet in your life that feels different than everyone else you've met. I don't know. I'm sure that I hope that goes without saying. I hope people believe that. Gotta keep moving. This relationship also represents the key to one of the deepest themes in the series. So Reina, of course, is like the superstar number one best player in the band. She deeply believes in her specialness. And as a result, she also believes in an absolute meritocracy for auditions. And to her, the success of the band is bound up with her success as a player, which is bound up with every personal ambition she has, and her obsession with the conductor, and her aspirations to live up to her father, and everything. So that's her in like a nutshell. And Kumiko is besieged by her consideration for everyone, and the idea that maybe she too is special, that she actually can transcend all of this, is this kind of like seductive idea that Reina offers her. And to me, this is basically the most compelling theme in the entire series. It's one that I saw come out very pronounced in episode 8, in the conversation they have. That Kumiko has this philosophy of trying to stay grounded, to have reasonable expectations, to kind of view all sides equally. And then someone comes along and says, take the plunge. Cast everything away. Believe in your own specialness. Do something that not everyone can do, because that is what you as an individual actually need. On one level, it's believing in your potential as a musician. On another, it's sneaking off to do what no one else is doing, which is the way they kind of frame climbing up the mountain to have their little intimate chat and performance while everybody else is at the festival. On another level, it's like maybe starting a romantic relationship with another woman. That too is sort of implied in this seductive offer that Reina makes Kumiko. Lots of my favorite Yuri series also operate with this theme, where lesbianism is conflated with some other big plunge that you take in life, some big risk, some big bet you make on yourself, where you kind of throw away the normal order of life of doing what you are societally expected to do, of doing what you're supposed to, and instead, wholeheartedly embracing this kind of wild external possibility. The recent movie I Saw the TV Glow, I think, also really operates around this sort of theme. There it's conflated with transition, and in a very, very strange way that I think has really deeply resonated with some people, and others are very kind of baffled at kind of what the messaging looks like on paper. But I think when it resonates with people, what resonates the most is this offer that presents itself to the main character. Will you take the plunge? So when I first watched this, I was like, right, I get it. I gotta be a novelist. I gotta write a lot. I gotta write 30,000 words about this. And I really did believe for many, many years that I was destined to be like Canada's James Joyce. I as far back as I can remember, really, I had ambitions to write, and I thought deep down I was this just preeminently brilliant writer, and that, yeah, eventually I was going to be putting out masterpieces that would live for centuries. Now, when I think of this idea, I don't know. Yeah, there's clearly other plunges that I was supposed to take that were actually much more important to my overall health and sanity and happiness. But, like, no, I actually still do think I'm special. I do think that I will achieve great things in my life. I think already that I have achieved great things in my life, but I feel ambitious and confident, and I want to take the plunge to do more. And this is the big theme of I Saw the TV Glow. It's never too late. It's not like, if only I'd been ambitious in high school. Nah. And making videos like this, small as my audience is tiny, but I love you guys. As unapproachable as the format is, who the hell is going to watch this? It's 3 hours long already. As niche as the subject is, anime is pretty popular, but is discussing anime at this length and depth popular? I do feel really proud of myself making these videos. I really do. I feel like I'm doing something no one else is doing. I don't even mean that in the literal sense. I'm sure there's other extremely long anime analysis videos out there, either in blog posts or on YouTube videos or whatever. But I feel like in doing this and devoting so much time and energy into it and caring so much about it and feeling so emotionally wrapped up in doing things like this, I am taking a plunge and stepping outside of the normal flow of society and doing my own thing. And it feels great. As Hibike ends on its own affirming note of self-actualization, I too feel empowered to keep making the life I want to live. I really don't know what else to say. It's kind of crazy, after 9 of the most eventful years of my life, always soundtracked by Hibike as this fleeting but recurring presence, it's over. So, that's not a surprise, probably. But we're not done yet. We couldn't end things on such a big, substantial emotional note. Such an emotionally riveting series. You need something to relax afterwards. And hey, guess what? Anime, it has you covered there too. And we got the masterclass of relaxation and Yashike delivering another lecture onto us. After the movie, which was also great, we returned to high school slice of life camping fun. The movie was a lot more complex and complicated and takes place when they're adults. And it's fantastic. I really highly recommend people watch it if you haven't. But now we're just back to the basics. Our cast of high school girls going camping, having fun. I wasn't really sure what direction it would go in. After the movie was such a bold departure, and this is now the 3rd season, 13 manga volumes are being adapted. There's maybe this kind of feeling of like, what are we going to do to kind of keep this fresh? And I was kind of worried that things would start getting like escalated in complexity or like switched up in the format in some ways that kind of felt unnecessary or excessive. But nah. If anything, this is like more to the core of YuruCamp than YuruCamp has been so far. The pacing, I think, is slower than it's ever been. There's fewer arcs that generally last longer. There's a couple kind of high concept episodes, but fewer than there were before. Generally, the tone is like a little more consistent, even more grounded. And even the big celebratory All My Friends Are Here finale trip, the scale and scope of it wasn't really that crazy. It was about the same as previous ones, so there wasn't even a feeling of like escalation there. And I think this is exemplified best by there's 2 new characters that show up in the OP. And I was like, whoa, they're adding characters. Oh my god, this is kind of crazy. But spoilers, these two characters only show up twice total, like in 2 scenes total, for like 10 minutes cumulatively. See you next time. TBH, I feel like they went so routine on this that it doesn't quite measure up to season 1 or 2 for me. It doesn't feel quite as masterful or as exciting or whatever. But that's fine. It did exactly what it needs to be, and that's more than enough. It fulfilled my desires for such a series, and gave me what I needed from it. In my review for season 2, I really tried to get at the heart of why this series works so well for me, why it gives me the reaction that it does, and why that reaction is so valuable to me. Like, why is it so relaxing? Why is it so charming? Why is it so healing? In that review, I mostly focused on like why slice of life, like what physiological effects it has on you, and why I needed it to be so healing at that time. And at that time, I really, really needed it. And, you know, I also kind of talked about how this was built up mechanically through episode structuring, directions, and stuff. I was really, really impressed with season 2 of this, and just in those terms. I think in how they like wrote slice of life plot lines was just like the best that's ever been done in slice of life as a genre. Contenders are maybe like K-On! And Hidamari, and that's about it. Maybe some of Yuri. As far as the effect goes, my life doesn't really need so much healing anymore. I feel like I kind of just keep like bragging about this almost. But relative to my entire life up until now, these days I am in such a good spot. And my consumption and need for slice of life series has also really substantially dropped off. It used to be that I would watch multiple every season, and then I would watch kind of like specific high profile ones. But now, kind of by default, I don't really watch them, and it's more like if it's an established franchise like this that's getting a new season, I'll watch it. And otherwise, there's just other genres that are like more interesting to me now. Just crazy. So really, what this series did for me this time is provide a much-needed contrast and relief from Hibike. As I said, I left these series and Demon Slayer for the end, and I just kind of created this playlist of them alternating, and watched it in gigantic marathon chunks. And it was really, really nice after just an intense, gripping, emotionally overloading, I'm crying and screaming Hibike episode. Boom, we're camping. I'm chilling. I'm grilling. It's all good. But you know, I can really still appreciate the value of having series like these. My own life has improved, but the world in general has gone to shit. And I think it makes sense for a lot of people to be very, very miserable these days. And that's what Slice of Life is for. That's what this sort of healing anime is for. So even if I didn't require it, I really appreciate that these series exist. And I often think, you know, there but for the grace of God go I, that so many of the things that really helped me out were so circumstantial and so random, so arbitrary, but so ultimately so valuable. And it's like, I could still be in the pit. Man, I could still be in the pit. If things had gone a little different. But yeah, and the episode direction and structuring, as I mentioned before, is still super, super on point. Highlights this season where the opener, where Shimarin, it bounces back and forth between her remembering the very first camping trip she went on with her grandfather, and then her current camping trip at the same location. It's just so touching. Just really nice sentimental stuff. And then another one that I absolutely loved is so Shimarin and Nadeshiko-chan and another friend of Nadeshiko-chan's go on a big camping trip. And then the other characters that call themselves the Leftovers also go on a camping trip. And they're telling Nadeshiko-chan later all the stuff that happened, but they like can't remember some stuff, and then they decide to like skip over other stuff, and they presented sort of like a variety show with all these like segments and stuff, and Nadeshiko-chan is in the little corner giving her reactions, and sometimes she like climbs into the scene. and just like really wacky stuff where like Anna-chan doesn't bring her dog because it's too cold for her dog, and she goes, "Well, in my memories though, I want to remember the dog being there because I feel bad that he was left out." So they're like, "Oh, okay, okay, the dog can appear in the story," and then there's a chance like, "Can you also put this Samoyed that I watch on YouTube? Can he come too?" So this other dog is there. Oh, it's so silly. It's so silly. It's so great. It's hilarious. It's about camping. YuruCamp is about camping. Talking about season 3, I wanted to really delve into something that I find even more essential than, you know, the direction or the relaxation. But this whole YuruCamp phenomenon, what it feels like to watch it, why it's so great. Which is essentially how it handles its subject matter, which is camping. I tried really hard one time to explain this to my boyfriend because he was mocking YuruCamp, the bastard, making jokes about what he thought it was like. I was like, no, it's not like that. It's not like that. And every time he suggested, you know, what he thought it would be, I was like, no, it's just about camping. You don't get it. It's just about camping. He's like, what do you mean by that? Like, it's just about camping. It's literally just about camping. Like, I don't know how else to put it. I still don't really know how else to put it. It's about camping in a way that Hibike really isn't about band. I think those two are very, very different. It's closer maybe to the way that Demon Slayer is about slaying demons. Does that make sense? Something about the scope of the subject matter, which is predominantly camping, but not strictly exclusively about camping. It meanders to include school or work or family or just whatever. Not, you know, extremely deliberately, but just, well, now it's a bit about this. Scope of characterization, which is very rich and varied, you know, we got some strong personalities, but it's always anchored around camping as this common interest, as this core subject matter and goal and thing that brings them all together. But then really camping as a subject really comprises of like sightseeing, onsen visits, DIY crafts, learning local history and trivia, a million other things. And then of that gigantic pool of sub-subjects, like maybe 60 to 70% is food. But it's not really contained in any of these factors. How exactly YuruCamp is about camping in such a unique way, it's mysterious. It's mysterious to me. I still don't quite know what I mean when I said, well, it's just about camping. And I wanna delve into that. It's going on the list with the self-excluding paradise of slice of life as topics for videos where I was like, yeah, this is interesting. There's really something here. And then the more I thought about it, the more I was like, I don't know what's here. I don't know what the answer is. But I'm convinced there's an answer. I'm convinced. It's also about friendship. One thing I did really figure out in watching this season, interspersed with Hibike, is I understood better the really lovely relationship between Shimarin and Nadeshiko-chan, why that appeals to me so much, how I think it works. It's really kind of similar to the relationship between Kumiko and Reina, sort of. I want to see like a double date doujinshi. Just a nice, kind, safer work one where they go have a fun time and maybe have some like deep conversations. Old habits die hard. Maybe I gotta draw it myself. As well as my doujinshi where Kiriyama from Sangatsu no Lion meets Yugami-kun from Yugami-kun Has No Friends. I'm cooking. I'm cooking. I just need to be able to draw. But I'm cooking. In both cases, there's a sense of specialness and intimacy that exists between them. You know, the relationship they have is special among all others. Even though neither Nadeshiko-chan or Shimarin kind of put on a different public-facing persona in the way, performance or persona, performa, in the way that Kumiko and Reina do, there's still this really sense of like extra warm coming home that they inspire in each other. When they meet up, when they text each other, when they camp together, it feels very unique among all the other friendships. It feels like that's the moment where they're truly at peace, where they're really camping. And similarly, it's an intimacy that was born from inspiring one another to take a plunge. Rin gets Nadeshiko-chan into camping. Nadeshiko opens Rin up to the idea of friendship, of camping with other people. Feeling of their friends becoming friends with their other friends, just these radiating connections that form around this core friendship. It's lovely. I don't know. At this point, when I was making the slides, I was like, well, I really want to record the video tonight. And holy crap, I'm making a lot of slides. So at this point, I kind of called it. I'm sure there'll be another season of YuruCamp. We can continue to delve into the mysteries of why it's so wonderful. I'll have other opportunities to speak about it. So I think we'll call it here. We're closing in on slide 50 at this point. And if I want to record this video without dying, I did it. I gotta call it somewhere. This also gets a 10. A triple 10 season. Let's go. Okay. 3 hours, 20 minutes. I'm happy. Good job, me. I did it. See you next time.